Mayor Du Bois, we're now live.
Great, thank you. Welcome to the council meeting of May 10th. If the clerk could please call the meeting to order.
Vice Mayor Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Cormack.
Here.
Mayor Du Bois.
Here.
Councilmember Philseth.
Here.
Councilmember Koo.
Here.
Councilmember Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Here.
7 present.
Great, I'm on a
Mayor Burt or Mayor Du Bois, you're breaking in and out and your volume is off. There you go.
I was saying I'm on a shaky internet connection. I'm going to ask the vice mayor to run the first part of the meeting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Our first item is actually a special order of the day, and we're planning to do an agenda change to allow Mayor Du Bois to be present for the item, which is appointment of candidates to the 3 different commissions. We're going to move that down until after the consent calendar and if need be, after the city manager comments. So having done that, we're going to proceed momentarily to oral communication. So any members of the public who wish to speak on items that are not otherwise on the agenda, please log in your request to speak at this time.
And Mr. Vice Mayor, if I might, in the
Yes.
momentary pause here, one more just under agenda changes to note that we do have an at places memo on your consent calendar, item number 5. This simply clarified the uses of a portion of the funds.
Great, thank you.
Any members of the public that wish to speak under oral communications, anything that is not on the agenda this evening, please raise your hand at this time. You'll be given 2 minutes. At this time, we have Rebecca Ward to be followed by Shawnee Kleinhaus and then Weijia Cheng.
Thank you. Each speaker will have up to 2 minutes to speak.
Rebecca, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
I request the city add an agenda item on its strategy to deal with jet traffic since its last ineffective, expensive strategy, the SCSC roundtable, which was not even an official airport roundtable, has been suspended. I will continue to come back before the council until the city addresses the increasing jet traffic that has occurred over the last 6 years, or more specifically on your watch. If you spend any time outside these days, you will often hear a plane every minute or 2. Those planes come with noise and unregulated emissions. It is astonishing that the city allowed 3 routes of SFO airport traffic with little pushback. Think about that. 3 highways to SFO cut through our city. The city is an easy mark for the FAA and SFO airport because they know they can concentrate as much traffic as they want over us and look the other way. Residents should not be complacent and accept this. It is truly disturbing that our neighboring counties have blocked our membership to the SFO roundtable for years, not because we aren't severely impacted by SFO operations, but solely because of where we live. Worse, that body then requests increase in altitude or movement of traffic to benefit their communities, but that has the effect of shifting traffic to us. The city of Palo Alto needs to be a lot more vocal about the complete inequity of 60% of arrivals traffic and 0% representation on SFO Airport's official roundtable. I can't see how any Bay Area community, including San Francisco, which owns the airport, sees that as anything but anti-democratic. The fact that the city has to beg for membership shows how broken the system is. The city is not powerless. It's just been ineffective and meek in its approach to dealing with the concentration. The result, the airport moves traffic over us at every turn. GBAS, a new landing system and an airport initiative, will do just that. The city needs to aggressively push back on GBAS before the end of May. The overlays will be implemented with the CADX that the FAA gives out like candy. The airport director is Ivor
Rebecca,
Satara.
can you sum up? Your time is up.
I am almost done. The airport director is ivar.satero@flysfo.com. You should let him know that 60% of the airport's traffic and 0% representation on the airport's official roundtable is unacceptable. So is implementing a landing system without environmental review that will worsen the problem. Thank you so much for letting me go a little over.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Shawnee Kleinhaus, to be followed by Wei Young Cheng and then Jeremy Ehrman. Shawnee, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening, Vice Mayor Barrett and council members. My name is Shawnee Kleinhaus. I'm a resident of Palo Alto and the environmental advocate for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. I was horrified to hear about the diesel spill into Matadero Creek. With the drought, water for birds and wildlife is scarce, and this is the height of the nesting and breeding season, where birds and other animals depend on creek water for their lives and raising their young. Traces of diesel may linger and harm aquatic and riparian species for a very long time. Unfortunately, investigations and processing of remediation for occurrences such as these can take a very long time and are often opaque. Too often, offenders get a slap on the wrist. For example, the county sued the mushroom farm in South County for polluting Fisher Creek. The lawsuit was for $67 million. The settlement was for $2.25 million. The farm also invested some money in upgrading their infrastructure. So I ask of you to be involved in the investigation, require monitoring and remediation, and ensure that a substantial fine is issued. In addition, please provide and require transparency and let the public, all of us, know what happens and when on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawnee. Our next speaker is Wei Cheng, to be followed by Jeremy Ehrman and then Rebecca Eisenberg. Wei, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, good evening, Vice Mayor and members of the Palo Alto City Council. My name is Wei Cheng, and I'm a resident of 380 Kirtner Avenue. At 9 p.m. on Sunday the 2nd, I was startled to hear an elderly Chinese woman shouting 救我啊, which, if you're not familiar with Mandarin Chinese, means save me, and the loud barking of dogs outside my apartment. I was deeply perplexed. Was a rabid dog attacking someone? I fearfully opened my door, and outside my apartment, I did not see rabid dogs, but rather multiple PAPD police cars, one a K9 car, and 3 officers who were detaining a startled and terrified elderly Chinese woman, my neighbor. She posed no threat to them, and from what I could tell, offered no resistance. All of this begs the question to me, why? I don't mean why was she detained, but why 3 police officers for a single elderly woman? Why a K9 car, which did nothing but frighten an entire neighborhood? Why was there no officer there who, as far as I could tell, could respond to her in Chinese when it seemed she could not speak English? What could possibly be the point of any of this? Was anyone made safer in my neighborhood that evening? And all of this during Asian Pacific American Heritage Month too. If you can write this off as normal and justified use of force, I have nothing more to say. But I speak to your living conscience and implore you to consider this matter further and ask yourself, was any of that worth it? All of this is true and is no exaggeration. I've even tweeted a video recording of what I saw to your council's Twitter account and even several of your personal Twitter accounts. No one responded. Was it because no one cared to look or because no one knows what to say? Thank you, and I yield my time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeremy Ehrman, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg and then Douglas Moran. Jeremy, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm very upset by the proposed cuts to the budget for the 2020 fiscal year. Not only are these cuts devastating to many of the city's arts and education programs, but the city council has not been given full information by city staff to make appropriate budget decisions. I sent the council and staff a letter where I pointed out that the budget provided is basically only a list of cuts that the city manager recommends with no other line items or explanatory information to make other cuts or different decisions. This information is not secret because much of it is actually online at the Administrative Services Department's Open Budget web app, where you can view line items in the budget. But they also have no explanations or context. So I urge the city staff to provide the full budget to the council and the public so that we can actually see the whole budget and what the cost of the programs are, because the cost of the programs that are being cut are only included in the budget, proposed budget, so far as they are being cut. The rest of their budgets are not in there, so the information is incomplete. I'm also extremely upset over the way that this process is being shoehorned in. The Finance Committee is meeting tomorrow and Wednesday, 9 to 5, no exaggeration, to essentially decide the entire budget. The entire Community Services and Library Department is being discussed for an hour and 50 minutes Wednesday morning. That's it. After this, the council is scheduled to discuss the budget next Monday at the end of the meeting for an hour and a half. That's it for the entire budget. You have almost twice that time scheduled today to discuss housing. So why is the budget not being discussed by the full council at multiple meetings all the way until it's passed in June? This is not responsible. You are not taking this seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Our next speaker is Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Douglas Moran, and then Hamilton Hitchings. Rebecca, go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Rebecca, go ahead. There you go. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Dear Palo Alto City Council, I question your judgment. Last week, you approved unprecedented budget cuts, which decimated and de facto eliminated most of the very special reasons why families move to Palo Alto, including the Children's Library, Children's Theater, the Palo Alto Art Center, upcoming promised improvements to bike and pedestrian safety in South Palo Alto, and almost every other differentiator that made Palo Alto special. Your city manager's report justified letting go of these extraordinarily important services on the grounds that no other city has them, as if we all don't pay an arm and a leg to live here for any other reason. Additionally, you eliminated every chance we have to actually mitigate climate change, including the still defunct electric shuttles, and taking a serious look to build infill housing, despite the letter from the Sierra Club, which instructed you that Palo Alto is no longer a green city because Palo Alto refuses to take seriously the need to build infill housing. It's not surprising that we had suffered from an extremely terrible recent environmental disaster with the contamination in Matadero Creek. And we keep hearing, as Mr. Chang said earlier, of police brutality by our Palo Alto Police Department, including with the dogs that we should never even be using, that they shouldn't be using. And almost every single incident is against a person of color. I ask you to reconsider everything you're doing. You're heading in the wrong direction. Our city is suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next speaker is Douglas Moran, to be followed by Hamilton Hitchings, and then Winter Dellenbach. Douglas, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, I'm Doug Moran of Barron Park. I want to speak about the fuel spill into Matadero Creek. I was 13 years on the Barron Park Association board, and I dealt with the cleanup from the previous spills. I was liaison to the state agencies for a couple years on this. The geology of the area is very complex because of earthquake faults. You have a deep gravel bed on the creek, and so you can often see the creek being dry, but the water's running through that gravel bed, and so you will see a section where there's surface water, then 30, 50, 100 feet of dry bed, and then you'll see it flowing again. There's also flows, because of the earthquake faults, There are sections where the water in the creek goes into the groundwater, and then there are sections of the creek where it comes out of the groundwater into the creek and flows further down. That led to the much wider dispersion of contamination from the previous contamination spills in the research park and the VA, but led to it being spread very widely. I suspect that that knowledge has been lost, and I would hope that you would push at the government agencies and you're using your own resources to make sure that they are aware of that complex geology and take it into account in the remediation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And, Beth, before proceeding, if I'd just like to let the public know that we're going to close accepting additional commenters for oral communications after the next speaker. So anyone who wishes to speak should sign up at this time.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Burt. Our next speaker is Hamilton Hitchings, to be followed by Winter Dellenbach and then Becky Sanders. Hamilton, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, dear City Council. My comments are brainstorming suggestions that could help reduce the budget shortfall, but these have not been vetted, so please keep that in mind. The loss of services proposed includes fire department personnel during fire season, reduction of crossing guards for school children, police traffic patrol to keep bicyclists and children safe. Thus, I suggest using the majority of the federal stimulus the first year and dipping into the contingency the next year if necessary. I also suggest keeping cost controls on staff personnel, including salary freezes, hiring freezes, and other cost controls that were put in place during COVID. And then the last is regarding the judge ruling blocking the transfer of utilities to the general fund. This is just a brainstorming idea, but is there an opportunity to recover some of the loss by internally charging for services the city provides to the utilities which are not being reimbursed? Ideas that come to mind are the utility share of the 911 center that's used for processing utilities customer calls, the lease costs or leasing the municipal center to the utilities and other lands owned by the city, and internal overhead, including human resources, accounting, IT, and management overhead. This might be an opportunity for millions of dollars in cost recovery, reducing the impact to city services temporarily until the general fund transfer issue is sorted out on a permanent basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamilton. Our next speaker is Winter Dellenbach, to be followed by Becky Sanders, and then Jonathan Ehrman is our final speaker. Winter, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
A toxic spill into a waterway is serious wherever it happens. On Thursday, it happened with Barron Park's wild Matadero Creek. An unknown amount of diesel fuel was spilled into the creek that is habitat for great blue herons, fish, fleets of ducks, frogs, plants, and as I was there this morning, a huge snowy egret. Dogs splash and drink from the creek. City council members, our elected representatives, were not told. Park commissioners were not told about this spill. The press couldn't alert us as they would normally because encryption doesn't allow police or fire scanners. Neighbors finally heard about it on Saturday. I discovered on Sunday night that the spill escaped containment and was downstream. This morning, I discovered contamination 500 yards downstream from the booms that were to contain it. It's now in the heart of Bull Park and maybe far beyond. Neither the VA, the city, nor anyone else had thought to do simply what I had done, apparently, scoop up some sediment and water and smell it, and fuels is in it. It is urgent that the extent of the spill and comprehensive plan to address it is formulated. Containment, cleanup, mitigation, restoration. What is being done to protect the public and pets at the park from accessing the creek as they can now? What impact has this had on the ecosystem of the creek? How long lasting is the contaminant in the creek, on animals, on plants, on the public? I am told that the fire department is handling this, yet the EPA and Fish and Game is listed. How do these groups interact? The neighborhood public council, parks and rec commissioners and staff need to get regular updates on this situation, starting tonight and continuing with specificity and including from the VA. Palo Alto is not a town which takes toxic spills into their creeks lightly.
Thank you, Winter. Our next speaker is Becky Sanders, to be followed by our final speaker, Jonathan Ehrman. Becky, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Clerk Minor. Good evening, council members. I am here to encourage council to rethink its approach to 2951 El Camino Real. The council tentatively greenlit the flipping of 2 R1 zoned properties to accommodate the developer. Council should reverse the flip, and this is why. First of all, it violates the city's own laws, which we elect you and pay the city staff to uphold. Number 2, it rewards bad behavior. One of the R1 properties has been out of compliance for 20 years or more. Despite neighborhood complaints, the city allowed the owners to profit without penalty, and now they are rewarded in their wrongdoing by a free up zone. Also, number 3, it disadvantages neighbors in one neighborhood. It hurts our feelings in Ventura when you allow R1 flipping over here, but protect it elsewhere throughout the city. Why does Ventura continue to beg for parity? Why make us beg for stuff that other neighborhoods routinely get? So more reasons. This allows the developer to encroach and encourages other developers to play the wait and see game. What concessions might they get from the city? It drives up the price of commercial mixed use land because giveaways add value to the land. That makes it really hard for nonprofits like Alta Housing to buy the land. It will make it harder for the city to create affordable housing. We allow the price of our land to continue to soar. What is the deal with that? Land value is defined by what can be built on it. And you know that, zone, zone, zone for what we want, rather than carve into Ventura and excise what little fat, if any, Ventura has on its bones. We need bold strokes, not piecemeal approaches to solving our housing shortage. Please save North Ventura from height and density that is not allowed elsewhere in the city, similarly zoned. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. And our final speaker is Jonathan Ehrman. Jonathan, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Jonathan. I wanted to speak about the proposed cuts in staffing, and particularly the costume budget at the Palo Children's Theater. This may seem like a small thing. It's sort of been pitched as a, well, you know, we have other people just sort of pitch in, we can cover, you know, what was done before. It won't be, you know, quite as snazzy, but it'll be fine. I think this is a real misapprehension of what the position is, how the costumes work at a theater, and a misapprehension of how other people could simply magically fill in. You know, the idea that, well, the theater has to reuse costumes. Well, it reuses costumes. All theaters reuse costumes. They keep stock. But somebody has to keep track of what that stock is. Somebody has to decide what's going to go on bodies for a current show. Somebody has to supervise parent volunteers, student volunteers in the costume shop. If there isn't a budget for hiring outside contractors to do individual shows with individual designers aside from the staff member, that makes sense. But somebody has to coordinate who is going to work on those shows from the theater. Somebody has to be in charge. The idea that, you know, somebody from another position on sets or directing or something will somehow, you know, magically find the time. I don't see the community services director or, you know, saying, you know, pitching it in their spare time. And this just means other people have to do more work. It doesn't make sense because costumes have to go on bodies, and somebody has to be in charge of that somehow and know what they're doing. Eventually you might have volunteers, eventually you'll start having a parent that you'll start paying, and then you'll be back with the position. So it's really self-defeating, and I think this is a kind of example of it's just being used to gut things that are needed, rather than looking at, well, okay, we need to save money, so we don't hire outside contractors, we rely more on volunteers, we make sure that the professionals who are on staff are doing jobs rather than hiring outside people. I also think the Children's Theater needs to focus, we need to make sure we have performances. The theater was founded on the idea of youth performing for youth. So we need to stop hiring adult actors to perform kids for children. Make it about the youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we are no longer taking speakers. So our last speaker was Jonathan Ehrman.
Thank you. And just before we move on to the next items, for those members of the public who are concerned with the issue, I believe the city manager will be giving a report on the the diesel spill during his comments later this hour. So our next item is approval of the minutes for April 19th, 2020. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion, and I'm on my home computer now, so thank you for your patience.
Great, then I'll second you.
Okay, so this is on the minutes. Let's go ahead and vote. Vice Mayor Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Cormack,
Yes.
I vote yes. Councilmember Filseth,
Yes.
Councilmember Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
and Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we're on to our consent calendar. There any motions or no votes from council members?
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I want to know on 7.
Great. Okay. Let's go to members of the public on consent.
Any members of the public that wish to speak to an item that is on the consent calendar, please raise your hands at this time. We will continue taking speakers for another 2 minutes. Our first speaker is Rebecca Eisenberg. Rebecca, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. First, quickly, I again state my disappointment in the offloading of the audit, extraordinarily important audit function to this Chicago-based firm. I'm baffled that the 2 most important items to audit were determined to be nonprofit contracts and the planning process. And when there's just so many extraordinarily important things to do. But I already wrote about that it was in the Daily Post. I want to talk about mainly your acceptance of funds for the California Citizens Options for Public Safety. Now, you may think that these funds must be used on giving police officers more money and continuing the program that exists, but that's just not the case. Many other cities are finding far more community-friendly uses for these funds. For example, some cities are using these funds actually to improve the body camera programs on the police officers. You may have seen with last June's extraordinarily upsetting dog bite incident where the Palo Alto Police Department ordered an attack dog to bite an innocent man prior to even determining his identity. And now, of course, the Palo Alto Police Department is being sued for $20 million. That you saw that how good our police cameras were just extraordinarily, our cameras were much worse than Mountain View's. And we had uploaded 1 grainy video while Mountain View had uploaded 8 extraordinarily good videos. So maybe we can improve that. Additionally, other cities are using the funds in order to make the radio transmissions hearable, not to hide them like our police department is doing. And we already saw with the case of Matadero Creek that concealing police communications from the community harms the community. So if you're going to take that cops money, please spend it on matters that help the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And our final speaker is Lucy Wicks. Lucy, confirm you want to speak to something that's on the consent calendar? You need to unmute from your end.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay, we'll go ahead and lower your hand. Thank you. Mayor Du Bois, that was our final speaker.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on the consent calendar. Councilmember Cormack.
Yes.
I vote yes. Councilmember Filseth.
Yes.
Councilmember Ku.
Yes.
Councilmember Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
and Vice Mayor Burt.
Yes.
So that was 7-0 with a no on item 7 by Councilmember Tanaka. Councilmember, would you like to speak to your no vote?
Yeah. So, well, generally I'm supportive of 7. The main issue I have, and it's something I talked about, and after our council meeting, I had a chance to talk to several of the businesses in the area, and I made the push for it, but I really think it's essential, which is that we have some metrics to measure how the success is going across different businesses, because I think some have done very, very well and some have not. And I think we need to actually take the time and do the work to really see how this has helped and perhaps hurt some businesses, so that we can make sure that there's that we're going to be able to have more successes all around versus just a few. So it's something I talked about it at the last meeting, but I think it's actually important to have it as part of this program.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to suggest, if we could, maybe we go back to item number 1 and start the voting process.
Mayor Du Bois, we will send out the Survey Monkey email to all of you at this time. If you'd like to take any public speakers that might want to speak on this item, and then while you continue through council, the city manager comments, then we'll continue the tallying, and as soon as we get the information back, we'll let you know and let the council know.
Okay, so if any members of the public would like to speak to the voting for appointments to council, board, and commissions, item number 1, now is the time. And council members, if you check your email, you should have the link.
Any members of the public that wish to speak to the appointments to the board and commissions that were interviewed by the council, please raise your hand at this time. Mayor Du Bois, there's no speakers.
Okay, let's move on to city manager comments.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Let's see if we can get, I know we're really, I think, pushing the city clerk's office to run the voting as well as the slides simultaneously. So thank you, Nellie and Beth, for working through this. Okay, next slide, please. A few items of note for timely information for the community. Also, I will be sending these slides to the council as soon as we're done. Apologies, I'll try to do that in advance for future meetings. First, just again, our weekly update on the importance of continuing to encourage community members to get vaccinated. In addition to our good track record, it is nonetheless very important that we expand the share of the community that is vaccinated now available to everyone 16 and older. We do know that there's progress being made on making vaccinations available to younger members of the community, so we'll provide additional information on that as it's available. Also on testing, that the county has scaled back or is scaling back its ongoing testing activities. So we do continue to offer our weekly testing through Curative on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, as well as the upcoming date with the County Public Health Department next Friday, the 21st at Mitchell Park. After this month, the county will be moving to a once a month frequency at Coverly. And so again, we'll be providing additional information as those dates get closer. Next slide, please. Just want to note additional dates upcoming for input on the city's budget. We do have the ongoing online survey for the budget input, and that will close on the 21st. We will try to get additional batches of community feedback to the city council in advance of that survey actually closing to make it perhaps a little more both readable for council members, as well as ensure that members of the community are aware that as their input and comments are provided, we'll provide that to the Finance Committee and the full council. And we've got additional dates as noted here with the Finance Committee this week, readout to the council next week, and the full council discussion next month. Next slide, please. Then noting Vice Mayor's comment earlier and members of the community expressing concerns with hazardous materials response that occurred last Thursday. Let me share what we know at this point and go through a few steps going forward. First, that the Palo Alto Fire Department was called out on Thursday afternoon, roughly 3 hours after reports of an oil spill from the Palo Alto Veterans Administration Hospital last Thursday. Since that time, the fire department has continued to oversee activities to contain and mitigate the spill in the creek. We do know that a third-party contractor, a contractor to the VA, is performing the cleanup effort and that this work has continued today. The fire department is conducting an investigation as follow-up appropriate through our hazardous materials unit, and is continuing to monitor both the cleanup as well as the follow-up monitoring work. At this point, we do know that there are several agencies involved in the incident, including the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, the county's district attorney's office we know has also been involved, as well as Valley Water, as well as obviously the Veterans Administration. I would note that my office has been in contact with Congresswoman Anna Eshu's office, as well as Assemblymember Mark Berman's office today to ask for their assistance in following up with both state and federal agencies as the elements of this and the follow-up actions come together. In addition to the fire department, our city public works watershed staff are also involved and documenting what they can on the activities as well as the follow-up and cleanup that is occurring. So I would note that in the mix of federal and state agencies, our city departments, particularly the fire department, has been on scene immediately as called and is continuing to monitor and provide assistance to ensure that we're doing what we can within the expertise of our city departments in order to ensure that this both the incident and the follow-up is handled as best as can be done. Next slide, please. Also, just want to alert members of the community to reports that our utilities department has received that once again, and we have periodically heard the reports of scammers calling customers and pretending to be representing Palo Alto Utilities. So if anyone is contacted by the utilities department, please hang up and call the police department to report any odd communications. Remember, you can always check online or call our utilities department directly to verify payment and status of accounts. That number is 650-329-2161. Next slide, please. Also want to note that in this evening's council packet under informational reports, we have two proclamations, one for Affordable Housing Month, recognizing that tonight you'll have a session related to the housing element. Also note that we have an upcoming community workshop planned for Saturday, May 15th. Also want to note in your packet is National Police Week, which is this week, as well as noting that we have the National Police Officers Memorial Day on the 15th of this week in recognition of fallen officers that have given their life in the line of duty. Next slide, please. Also have upcoming events along our race and equity theme and following up on the council's approved work plan. A number of dates coming up. I won't identify them individually. These are all, as noted last week, on our new homepage under news and with information and calendars available for upcoming events. Next slide, please. And then let me close with upcoming council items. Next week, as noted, we have a finance committee report out midway through the budget process, as well as a study session on the annual National Community Survey. Then on Tuesday, a special session of the City Council dedicated to land use. So a number of proposals here, 955 Alma, 2239 Wellesley, as well as discussion of the potential for an appeal of the city's regional housing needs allocation, and 181 Addison, a request for variance related to subdivision. And then later in the month, on the 24th, a fiber to the home extended session discussion with the City Council and a significant green waste contract. And then next slide, please. And finally, note some upcoming items for your June agenda. Since dates in June are still somewhat being settled, we haven't identified specific dates here, but that will be provided shortly. And I believe that's our last slide.
Great,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
So
Mayor,
tonight,
we do have one of the board's responses back.
okay,
If you would like me to read that out.
sure.
For the Human Relations Commission, we have Councilmember Cormack voting for Sunita Terrell. We have Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, and Councilmember Stone voting for Adriana Eberly. We have Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Stone, and Mayor Du Bois voting for Michelle Kraus. And we have Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, and Councilmember Stone voting for Coloma Smith. So Adriana Eberly, Michelle Kraus, and Coloma Smith have all been voted to be on the Human Relations Commission.
Great, and you'll just fill us in on the rest as they come in, as the results pour in.
Yes, we will, just like
Council-
elections night.
Yeah. Councilmember Koo, did you have a quick comment? Okay. Okay, so tonight we have a little bit unusual. We have an action item and then we have a closed session after that. And the action item is kind of a two-part item. There's going to be a joint council and planning commission session. And then we're going to go to council only and have a little bit of a discussion and an action item. So would staff like to go ahead and kick us off tonight?
Sure, thank you.
And I guess we could be joined by the planning commission if they want to turn their cameras on.
Yep, that'd be great if the planning commissioners can put their cameras on. Good evening, City Council. Good evening, Chair. Is Chair Heckman with us? I don't see him yet, but good evening, Planning and Transportation Commissioners. I'm Jonathan Late, Director for Development Services, and just want to thank each of you for being available this evening to consider this study session or be a part of the study session. This is really a sort of a kickoff meeting for us to sort of publicly share with our the commission and the council and our efforts to produce a housing element that can be certified by the state and meet our local and state objectives. We have this evening, we would welcome any questions that commissioners or council members have regarding material that we've provided in our staff report or the presentation that you received this evening. There's clearly a lot of challenging policy issues that need to be addressed. We're not expecting to delve at this evening. There will be plenty of opportunity down the road to get feedback from both the council and commission, as well as many other forums setting up. But tonight, what we want to do is present our overall approach or strategy and schedule, as well as flag some of the challenges that we will have along our way. And to do that, we have our consultant that is going to make a presentation. But before our consultant gets started, I would like to introduce Tim Wong, who's just shown up on screen here. Tim Wong is a senior planner with our office. He's got just a tremendous amount of housing experience, and we're fortunate that he was also a part of our housing update the last time we went through this process. So very familiar with Palo Alto and what the requirements are going forward. So Tim, if you don't mind, maybe you can give yourself just a brief introduction before you turn it over to the consultants.
Sure, great. Thank you, John. Good evening. Once again, my name is Tim Wong. I am the project manager for the city's housing element update. And although tonight is a kickoff meeting, I will say that the city has been busy behind the scenes getting ready for this update. As John mentioned, we have selected a housing consultant who will be providing this evening's presentation. We established the working group and they had their first meeting last week. And I thought it was a great meeting. And as the city manager mentioned, we also have a community meeting this Saturday from 10 to noon to help help educate the community about the housing element update. And also just a shameless plug for the city's housing element website at paloaltohousingelement.com. You can get all the information you need about the city's update process at that website, and we'll have that address up at the end of the presentation. So thank you very much. I would like to now turn the time over to our consultant, Della Acosta of Rincon Consultants, and she'll be providing this evening's presentation. So thank you.
Good evening, commissioners and council members. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I am disabled from screen sharing. Could someone?
Yeah, so maybe we can get the city clerk's office to enable sharing for Della.
Or to share it directly. Either would work fine.
You should be able to share now.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And I am sharing my screen over here, so I apologize if I'm constantly glancing back and forth. So my name is Della Acosta, and I lead the comprehensive planning services for Rincon Consultants, and my team and I are assisting staff with the preparation of the 6th cycle housing element update. I'm here tonight with my colleagues Brenna Weatherby and Veronica Tam to provide some background and information about the housing element update project. Tonight, I'll be presenting information on a number of topics. First, we'll start with an overview of the housing element, focusing on what it covers and why it's important to the city. Next, we'll discuss topics that need to be considered when updating a housing element, including the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which you'll see and hear me refer to as the city's RHNA, and state legislation that influences housing elements and housing development. And finally, we'll review the 6th cycle housing element schedule and the council and commission's role in that project. So let's start by talking about the housing element itself. The housing element is one of the 8 mandatory elements in the city's general plan, or in Palo Alto, what's called the comprehensive plan. The housing element is governed by the California Government Code, as is the comprehensive plan. However, the housing element is unique in that it is required to be updated every 8 years in accordance with the RHNA cycle and associated planning period, and it must be certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. The certification deadline for jurisdictions in our region, the AVAG region, is January 31st, 2023. The housing element covers 4 broad categories, which you see here. The development of a community profile, including socioeconomic demographics and housing stock characteristics that allow for the analysis of existing and projected housing needs for the city. The housing element also includes a look at various governmental and non-governmental constraints to housing to determine where barriers might exist. Governmental constraints include things like land use and zoning control, development fees and city policies. Non-governmental constraints include things like the cost of land, the availability of financing, construction costs, and environmental impacts. The housing element must also provide information on housing resources across the city, including the identification of sites that can be used for future residential development in order to meet the RHNA requirement, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Housing sites for all economic segments of the community must be identified, along with housing for the aging population, persons with special needs, and emergency shelters. The discussion on housing resources includes information on programs for the preservation of housing as well. And finally, the housing element provides an implementable plan for the 8-year planning period. This includes the development of goals, policies, and programs with quantified objectives that support the plan for housing. Resources to achieve these goals, like federal resources and state financing that is available to builders and cities looking to finance residential projects, is also identified. There are a few different objectives to keep in mind while we're preparing the updated housing element. First, the housing element will provide adequate planning to accommodate housing needs for all socioeconomic segments of the community. It will assist in the development of housing that is affordable to lower and moderate income households. It will streamline housing development by removing barriers to housing development. It will preserve and improve existing affordable housing, and it will ensure equal housing opportunities for all residents in Palo Alto. Failing to meet the state requirements can result in significant penalties. Given the current housing crisis in California, each year the state legislature introduces new laws that increase and expand the penalties for noncompliance and impose limitations on local controls affecting housing production. As mentioned earlier, state law requires a jurisdiction to update their housing element on an 8-year cycle consistent with the region's RHNA application. Failing to achieve the certification by HCD's deadline results in a jurisdiction having to update their housing element on a 4-year cycle, twice as often. Under Assembly Bill 101, jurisdictions failing to timely adopt a local housing element may be fined tens of thousands of dollars per month until HCD determines compliance. And failure to certify a housing element can result in the jurisdiction's general plan or comprehensive plan being deemed inadequate and invalid, which leaves the jurisdiction open to litigation regarding the validity of any land use decisions that jurisdiction makes. And finally, under Senate Bill 2, jurisdictions that do not have an approved HCD certified housing element are not eligible for a multitude of grant funding programs. RHNA is a mandated process by the state, and the assessment is aimed at quantifying housing needs throughout a particular region. It sounds like you have been following this process pretty closely, but I'm going to give a quick overview of it. RHNA is used in the local planning process to address future housing needs resulting from population, employment, and household growth. As mentioned previously, the RHNA process examines an 8-year planning process. The city is currently in what's referred to as the 5th cycle. The 6th cycle covers the next planning period, which is why you will hear it referred to as the 6th cycle housing element or the 6th cycle update. And the planning period for this update will extend from January 2023 to January 2031. So I want to put into context how RHNA is created and how it eventually ends up in local jurisdictions. It starts at the state level with the California Department of Housing and Community Development, with HCD. California Government Code requires HCD to develop a methodology to create the RHNA allocation for each Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. There are 18 MPOs across the state of California. We'll be focusing on the ABAG region since that's where Santa Clara County is located. HCD's RHNA methodology is created using population projections from the Department of Finance and regional population estimates taken from each MPO's regional transportation plan. For the Bay Area, that's Plan Bay Area. Once the RHNA allocation is determined, they will issue that allocation to the MPO. In our case, that's ABAG. ABAG is then tasked with creating a separate methodology to distribute those units across its region. This methodology must be approved by HCD, and those units are provided to each jurisdiction. Each city and county must then prepare a housing element that provides for the future development of the RHNA allocation that's set forth by ABAG. ABAG's methodology for distribution of the 6-cycle RHNA is based on regional data and factors, and the methodology is very nuanced and it can be confusing, but we thought it was worthwhile to run through it at a very high level just to give it some background. They started by determining projected housing needs for each jurisdiction. Projected need was calculated using regional household growth, regional future vacancy need, and regional replacement need. Next, ABAG determined where the existing needs within the region, where there are existing needs within the region and within each jurisdiction. ABAG then divided that need between very low and low income categories and moderate and above moderate income categories. They then applied weighted factors to the housing needs based on access to what they consider high opportunity areas and job proximity via auto transportation, with an additional consideration for job proximity via transit access for the very low and low income categories. And then an equity adjustment was also identified for jurisdictions that exhibited racial and socioeconomic demographics that differed from the regional average, which was designed to ensure that these jurisdictions have an allocation of lower income units that is at least proportional to its share of the region's total households in 2020. Palo Alto was not one of the jurisdictions that was identified for the equity adjustment. The city's allocation was already considered to be in line with the regional average after those other weighted factors were considered. Jurisdictions are provided with their RHNA allocation in multiple income categories, shown here on the right side of your screen. Very low income units are categorized as units that are affordable to persons earning between 31 and 50% of the area median income, or AMI. Low income units are units for persons earning between 51 and 80% of AMI. Above moderate income units are, moderate income units are for persons earning between 81 and 120% of the AMI, and above moderate income units are units considered affordable to persons earning greater than 120% of AMI. So Palo Alto's total allocation for the 6th cycle is 6,086 units. And just to compare that with some of your neighbors, that's lower than Sunnyvale, which has a RHNA of about 12,000, but it is higher than Cupertino, which had a RHNA allocation of about 4,600. Palo Alto's 6,086 units were allocated across multiple income categories, like I just talked about. And you see that distinction between each category listed here. 1,556 units to the very low income category, 896 units to the low income, 1,013 to the moderate, and 2,621 to the above moderate. So these are the number of housing units that the city will need to plan for in its housing element over the next 8 years. How will Palo Alto plan for these units to meet the RHNA allocation? So there's a number of steps that we'll take, and these steps comprise what's known as the sites inventory or the sites analysis. First, we take a look at pending and approved projects. Residential development projects that have an application on file at the city or have been approved but have not yet pulled building permits by July 1st of this year can be counted towards the RHNA allocation. Next, we will evaluate sites across the city that have appropriate residential zoning designations and can accommodate residential development by each category. We can include sites that were used in the last couple of housing element update cycles, albeit with some caveats attached to them. Sometimes rezoning is required in order to meet the RHNA allocation. We will look at commercial and industrial sites first, then multifamily housing sites before we look at single family. And we will identify together the sites that are appropriate for this level of density in order to meet the RHNA. We will also take a look at accessory dwelling units or ADU production, development constraints on housing development, and new housing legislation to see if we can improve any processes to allow for more housing. And we'll review the city's housing programs and policies to see where they can be improved and ensure they're meeting the needs for all Palo Alto's residents. Aside from complying with the city's RHNA, housing elements for the 6th cycle have become more complicated due to the amount of state housing legislation that has been adopted over the past few years. In this table, you see the more significant legislation, and I'm going to run through a few in particular. SB 1397 is the legislation that regulates the housing sites inventory process. This bill requires the inventory to specify the number of units that can be realistically accommodated for each site and whether that site is adequate for lower income housing, moderate income housing, or above moderate income housing. Like I said, sites from previous housing cycles can be used, but there are caveats such as including a program to allow by right development for projects that contain at least 20% affordable units, size limitations to the sites that can be used, and no net loss for lower income units if you are reusing sites from previous cycles. SB 166, a city cannot reduce residential density on a property without concurrently rezoning another property to make up for those lost units. Furthermore, if a city approves a project that can result in a density lower than the housing plan identified, it must rezone another property to make up for that difference. AB 686 is the affirmatively furthering fair housing legislation. This requirement seeks to overcome historic patterns of segregation and remove barriers that restrict access to housing. It requires jurisdictions to remove impediments to fair housing and include meaningful goals to address displacement and systemic inequities. And AB 725 focuses on the construction of missing middle housing, medium density, moderate income housing. Under AB 725, local governments are required to plan for at least 25% of moderate income housing to be located in areas zoned for between 4 and 100 units per acre, and at least 25% of above moderate income homes to be located in areas zoned for at least 4 units per parcel, which means jurisdictions have to specifically plan for multifamily developments of 4+ units per acre, not duplexes on smaller lots that gets them to 4 dwelling units per acre density. Other legislation that will be relevant during this update include SB 330, the Housing Crisis Act, which introduces even more expedited review process for residential development projects than SB 35 does, and prohibits and prohibits cities from imposing growth caps or moratoriums on housing projects or plans. SB 229 has made numerous changes to law pertaining to the development of accessory dwelling units or ADUs, and changes may need to be made for the city's zoning ordinance to comply with state law. And SB 35, also referred to as Affordable Housing Streamlining Approval, which I mentioned earlier, if HCD finds that a jurisdiction's RHNA goals are not being timely satisfied, SB 35 requires cities and counties to streamline review and approval of eligible affordable housing projects by providing a ministerial approval process, exempting such projects from environmental review under CEQA and the public hearing process. That was a lot. This is a look at the timeline for the 6-cycle housing element. The schedule was very carefully planned based off of our experience updating housing elements in other jurisdictions to allow for a good amount of buffer to get the tasks done while still giving proper attention to each step in the process. We kicked off the project with staff in March of 2021. And as Tim mentioned, we just held the first working group meeting last Wednesday, May 6th. We're here today conducting this kickoff meeting, and we'll have a more community-focused virtual workshop on Saturday, May 15th. Hopefully we'll see some of you there. All of these meetings are part of the overall public engagement plan, and we will have a wide variety of additional community engagement plans throughout the rest of this year and into next year. We'll be starting the site selection process with the working group very soon, with a PTC update of the selection in July and a review of the sites in January of 2022. We anticipate council to review the site selection in March and to review the housing element programs in May of next year, and to have the full draft ready for initial review in late May. HCD has timelines for the review of draft documents, so we're looking to submit the draft housing element to HCD for their review in June of next year, with council hearings to adopt the housing element taking place in November of 2022, with the goal of obtaining HCD certification by the January 2023 deadline. Note that we do have touch points with PTC 4 times and with council 3 times throughout the housing update process to ensure that there won't be any surprises, and you can provide input and direction every step of the way throughout this update. So the recommended motion is to approve the overall project schedule and approach, as well as the roles and responsibilities of the Housing Element Working Group, Council Ad Hoc Committee, and PTC as documented in the staff report. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and city staff and the consultant team are available to take questions.
Great, thank you again. And what was the name of the consulting company again?
Rincon Consultants.
Great, thank you. Before we go to the public, does the city clerk have any updates on the voting in item 1?
I do, Mayor Du Bois. On the voting for the Public Art Commission, we will have to go out for a second round. We have voting for Shiraz Baha, council members Cormack and Tanaka. For Lauren Gordon, we have Vice Mayor Burt, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka. For Emily Meyer, we have Councilmember Cormack. For Ben Miyagi, we have Mayor Burt, Councilmember Stone, Councilmember Tanaka. For Clea Mugler, we have Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, and Councilmember Koo. And for Lisa Waltuch, we have Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, and Councilmember Stone. So Lauren Gordon and with 6 votes and Lisa Waltuch with 6 votes are both appointed to the Public Art Commission, but we do need 1 more. Looking at the Stormwater Oversight Committee, we have Stephanie McDonald was voted 4 by Councilmember Cormack, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka. On Hal Mickelson, Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka voted for Hal Mickelson. Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, and Councilmember Stone all voted for Dina Mosser. Vice Mayor Burt, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Tanaka voted for Catherine Perman. Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka all voted for Bob Wenslow. So we have Hal Mickelson with 7 votes, Bob Wenslow with 7 votes, Dina Mosser with 6 votes, and Catherine Perman with 5 votes are all appointed to the Stormwater Oversight Committee, and we do not need to do a second vote on that. We will need a second vote for the Utility Advisory Commission, as we have Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, Councilmember Koo, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka voting for John Bowie, Councilmember Cormack and Councilmember Tanaka voting for Carol Guthrie, Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, and Councilmember Koo voting for Don Jackson, Vice Mayor Burt and Councilmember Stone voting for Phil Metz. So we have John Bowie with 7 votes who is appointed to the Utility Advisory Commission, but we do need another person. We will send you the email at this time for the second round of voting. Mayor Du Bois, I'm done for this moment.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for juggling
you.
these things tonight. Let's go ahead and hear from the public. Back to the item number 8.
Any members of the public that wish to speak to agenda item number 8, please raise your hand at this time. We will be taking speakers for another 6 minutes. Our first speaker is Pixel 4A, to be followed by Jeremy Ehrman. Pixel, go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, hi, it's Kathy Jordan. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to bring forward a few recent data points for the council to consider as it's discussing the RENA housing allocations, many of which probably the council knows about, but wanted to highlight those. So recently, according to the California Department of Finance, the state of California lost 182,000 people from January 2020 to January 2021. Again, according to the California Department of Finance, Santa Clara County's population fell by 0.6% in 2020, the first year of a population decline, and after having been nearly flat in population growth for both 2018 and 2019 as well. According to the US Census, over the last decade, the state of California had its lowest population growth rate in history and will lose 1 congressional seat. According to an online data tracker managed by Harvard University, the share of California small businesses still closed compared to January 2020, just prior to the onset of the pandemic, stands at 35.9%. According to the Embarcadero Institute, as you know, there have been some questions raised about the RENA methodology, the questions about double counting and the use of a non-standard vacancy measure that vastly increased housing allocation numbers. I just wanted to raise several of these data points so that the council might take these into consideration when weighing its response to the ABAG RENA allocations. Certainly the pandemic has had a significant short-term impact. However, these long-term trends are borne out by some of the data that we are seeing that has come forward. Also, one last point, it just was announced in terms of possible state funds that the state of California has a $75 billion surplus. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeremy Ehrman, to be followed by Jeffrey Hook, and then Rebecca Eisenberg, and we will be taking speaker hands until the end of Jeremy Ehrman's talk. Jeremy, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm actually kind of confused why this presentation is being brought to the council now and why the council is discussing it, especially because, at least on paper, this item has been given 2 hours and 40 minutes of possible discussion time. Next week, you've only scheduled an hour and a half to discuss the entire budget. This item, apparently the decisions to be made on this are not going to be made for months or even years. So, and yet next month, you have to pass a budget which will go into effect in July, and you're not even sure you have the money to keep Children's Library open. So I'm not quite sure why it's more important for the council to spend more time on this right now than it is on the budget. And I'm also very confused as to why there are multiple consultants that were involved in preparing this report. Everything in the report appears to be basic information on how the state process for essentially certifying new housing works. But this seems to me all basic information that the Planning and Transportation Department should be able to provide to the City Council and the rest of the city staff. So I don't quite understand why the city has to presumably spend money to hire consultants when you have an in-staff planning group which supposedly should be able to look this information up. So I'm really confused to be putting the resources into this at this time. I know this is an issue that has to be dealt with, but this seems a very strange time to deal with it. And so I don't quite understand why this is being given such a priority at this incredibly crucial time when the city doesn't even think to keep the lights on in many city facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And we will no longer be taking any speaker hands. So our last speaker this evening on this item will be Arthur Keller. Our next speaker is Jeffrey Hook, to be followed by Rebecca Eisenberg and then Kelsey Baines. Jeffrey, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I just have a couple of simple questions. One is, when the RENA calculation was done, was climate change taken into account? Because the best projections are that the wetter parts of the US are going to get wetter, and the drier parts, which include California, are going to get drier, as well as hotter. Snowpack is expected to decrease by 2/3. And this has major implications for our water supply. Does it make sense to be planning for more people at a time when water is going to become increasingly scarce? Secondly, in the RENA calculation, if Palo Alto rezones commercial sites as residential, thus reducing the number of jobs here, does that reduce our RENA allocation at all? Those are 2 questions. And then third, more people on the planet spells more consequential implications for climate change, loss of biodiversity, stress, war, famine, etc. At a time when humans are in major ecological overshoot, doesn't it make more sense to plan for a reduced population, plan toward reducing population, not increasing it? And yes, then addressing questions of equity, fairness, ecological sustainability, and those kinds of things. But I think we need to have some serious pushback on the projections and how they were done, given that a house lasts 60 to 100 years. And so the time frame for planning needs to be at least 60 to 100 years in the future. And we've already seen with coronavirus that major disruptions can happen and catch us all off guard. And it's better to be conservative than to be speculative. And, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Our next speaker is Rebecca Eisenberg, to be followed by Kelsey Baines and then Salim Demirji. Rebecca, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. What do you all have against housing? Seriously, have you looked to see what's going on in Santa Monica and Venice Beach? Have you looked at the number of people now living in tents pretty much all over our state? In the absence of housing, people do leave, which is one of the biggest reasons for the population decline, or else they pitch tents. Do you want this? There's significant misunderstandings that you all operate on and that you promulgate to others, including some of the previous speakers. You really need to correct this. The Sierra Club actually did a good job in their letter. I hope you read it. First of all, you need to understand that housing helps the environment. It doesn't hurt it. As the Sierra Club makes clear, Palo Alto is no longer considered a green city because Palo Alto refuses to build infill housing. Infill housing reduces harm to the environment, A, by taking cars off the street, B, by lowering the amount of other pollution and usage, including water. Housing reduces the need for water because commute times, long commutes, overuse water. Secondly, as the Sierra Club correctly noted in their letter to you about how Palo Alto is no longer a green city, the Sierra Club correctly noted that Palo Alto needs to rethink its restrictive zoning. The height limitations are a big problem because when you can't build up, you build out or you build down. But we have a lot of super fun sites going on here. We can't build down. Also, we need to remove the car requirement and focus on transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And for the council members, Nellie just resent the voting email to you as there was some confusion in it. So if you look at your email, the last one is the correct one. Our next speaker is Kelsey Baines, to be followed by Celine Demergy and then Jordan Grimes. Kelsey, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hi there. My name is Kelsey Baines. I'm a resident of Palo Alto. I really agree with all the things Rebecca just said. If we care about climate change and we want to respond to our climate emergency, the most impactful thing that the city of Palo Alto can do is allow more infill building of housing so people can live in walkable communities and not rely on a car. So we do have a dire housing emergency. We see how many of our neighbors are currently living in vehicles, how many people are rent burdened, how many people are even living on the streets. And if you're a financially secure homeowner, you might not feel the housing crisis in the same way that renters are feeling it. But it is still an emergency and people in our community are still struggling. Not everyone can work from home. And that suffering really harms our whole community because we need our essential healthcare workers, people who provide childcare to live in our community and to be part of it. And one of the things I am most looking forward to in terms of having conversations in the upcoming housing element cycle is around this issue of affirmatively furthering fair housing. And we need to be doing that both in our process to have a more inclusive process, but we also need to look to do it in the sites we identify to proactively seek to undo patterns of segregation rather than continuing to push low-income people into more polluted areas and areas with fewer resources like grocery stores. So I hope we can have an inclusive process. I was disappointed that the mayor purposefully kept housing advocates off of the Housing Element Advisory Board and that there's only one market rate tenant on the Housing Element Working Group. Market rate tenants are the most impacted by the housing crisis. Many low-income people live in market rate housing, and we deserve representation in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Our next speaker is Celine Demergy, to be followed by Jordan Grimes, and our final speaker is Arthur Keller. Celine, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the chance to speak. I'm Salim, and to me, this next housing element update means a lot. So when this next RENA cycle ends, I'll be 35. Most of my friends will probably be married and trying to find a home to settle down in. And the next housing element cycle will decide whether all of us can stay in the Bay Area or whether the housing crisis will get even worse. And so I know, like Kelsey says that, or said that not everyone feels the housing crisis, but those of us who are younger, who were born after 1990 or even born after 1980, are feeling it acutely. So this update means a lot to me. I do think that Palo Alto should focus on its role in affirmatively furthering fair housing when it considers doing this update. And that starts with who gets to be part of this housing element work group. Like Kelsey said, I was also very disappointed that there was not a tremendous amount of representation from, quote, like all economic segments, end quote, of the community. And so that clearly, I think is a bad place to start. Palo Alto has a history of housing segregation. It's well documented. For instance, if you read the complaint from the NAACP and ACLU regarding Foothills Park, you can read about, the Palo Alto Chamber of Commerce calling for the creation of a segregated district for the Oriental and colored people of the city. That's a quote. Or the FHA and VA restrictions on insuring mortgages for homeowners in non-white neighborhoods as part of redlining. There's also block busting, which is when realtors systematically incited white flight out of neighboring communities such as East Palo Alto. Also giving free bus rides to African Americans through East Palo Alto to encourage Black families to settle there. So the history of segregation is alive in Palo Alto, or is still with us in Palo Alto. We need to actively reverse it. And that requires rethinking a lot of basic premises of Palo Alto zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. Our next speaker is Jordan Grimes, to be followed by our final speaker, Arthur Keller. Jordan, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Yes, good evening, Council. Jordan Grimes of Peninsula for Everyone. I wasn't planning on commenting, but I felt the need to do so after some of the earlier comments that were made. Just a couple quick notes here. Populations can't grow if you don't build housing for them. When you spend decade after decade making it difficult and or impossible to do so. Given California's and Palo Alto specifically unfortunate commitment to making housing as expensive and difficult to build as possible, it's a miracle that our population has kept growing for as long as it has. And it's frankly a testament to how much people will endure to live here. There aren't questions about the accuracy of the RENA numbers by any credible group. The Embarcadero Institute report, I hesitate to even call it that, on the so-called double counting of statewide RENA has been repeatedly debunked by numerous academics. And it's frankly disturbing to see a housing element working group member citing the Institute's claims. And then finally, calling for population reduction is ecofascism. There's really no other way to put it. I'd ask whether those who advocate for such, I'd really ask how they'd accomplish that. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to both observing and engaging with this process. It's sure to be very entertaining. Thanks.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Arthur Keller. Arthur, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I would like to speak to further, because we have to build low-income housing. We have built almost all of our housing has been market rate, and we have to build low-income housing in order to meet our RENA allocation. I think that's all I have to say. Low-income housing.
Thank you, Arthur. Mayor Du Bois, that was our final speaker.
Okay, great. And so where are we on the voting at this point?
We are still waiting for Councilmember Tanaka to put his votes in on both of the commissions.
Okay. So Greg, if you could do that. Okay. I'm going to suggest we take our first break, which we usually take early in the meeting now, and then we'll come back and start the discussion with the Planning Commission. So it's 6:30. If everybody could be back on at 6:40, we'll jump in. Thanks. So if you're back, please turn your camera on. Okay, I think we have a quorum. I think Councilmember Tanaka is there. Councilmember Tanaka, I think their clerk's still trying to get your vote in on the second round.
Oh, I did submit it.
Okay. Beth, have you gotten it?
No, we still haven't received it.
Maybe send Councilmember Tanaka the link one more time, because you can't go back to the survey if you've submitted it. Okay, so we're going to move on. So this item tonight is really about the process, the schedule. First of all, I want to say welcome and thanks to our Planning Commission for being here tonight. So what I'm going to suggest is that we do kind of a round of questions and comments from the Planning Commission and then the council around the process. That's with all of us here, that's going to take a fair amount of time. And then we'll end the joint session and we'll go to council for an action item on the schedule and the approach. So let's start with the Planning Commission. If you'd like to make a comment or have questions, again, about the process, this isn't really, around the politics of this. I'd really like us to focus on the process tonight. Go ahead and please raise your hand. Okay, so Commissioner Suma, thanks for kicking us off tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you to the staff and consultants, and thank you for the City Council for having us over, and also to the public for all the comments. I wanted to get clarification on the slide that had the timeline. And so initially HCD has their initial review in June of 2022, and that's after council review in May of 2022. So am I correct in thinking the period between June of 2022 and January of 2023 is the period in which if there were any deficiencies in our element, it would come back to us, and then by January 31st, it's over? Or is there still time after the 31st for it to come back to us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, first, why don't we get the slide back on the screen, Della, if you don't mind. I'm sorry, Commissioner.
I don't remember what slide it was.
Okay, well, we can find it. It's the schedule slide. There we go. And then Della, do you want to speak to that period of time that Commissioner Suma was talking about? I believe from June 2022 through January 2023 as an opportunity to make some course corrections that may be needed.
Yes, sorry. It readjusted all my windows when I shared my screen. So now I'm getting back to getting myself sorted again. Yes, so that's basically correct. So HCD will review the document at that point, and they will send it back to us for comments. And Brenna, I'd also ask for you to jump in because you've done this process many, many times down in the SCAG region as well. And Veronica Tam is on as well, who's been working with HCD for quite a while. And then we can address any comments from HCD and submit it for the final certification.
So Della, I can jump in. So the draft element will be submitted to HCD and showing here June 2022. So HCD has a 60-day review period at that point. And so you are correct that would be the time when they would come back to us and let us know if there are any deficiencies in the draft element, or if there's anything else that they would like to see. There is likely going to be some back and forth then between HCD. Once they are okay with it, it will then go to Planning Commission and Council for adoption, and then it goes back to HCD for certification. So generally, yes, you are correct that that time period between June and January is when we would work on any deficiencies. And we are in constant communication and really working side by side with HCD at that point.
Okay, and so January 31st of 23 is the final deadline. There's no time after that to repair any deficiencies.
Well, it really depends on where you're at. Once the document is adopted by council, it's then submitted to HCD. So there are typically not any revisions made at that point. HCD may come back and ask for like a minor text change or something like that, if they see a word misspelled or something like that. But yes, generally, once council adopts it, it really is not altered in any way after that.
And Brenna, if I can interrupt and mention a little bit, there is a grace period from the statutory deadline if the city is eligible for it. And so if at that point you want to make additional changes and you're eligible for the grace period, then you could still take a little bit of time, but definitely we don't recommend stretching it too far because missing the deadline is the consequences are more significant. So.
Okay, thank you so much. That really helps clarify that. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Okay, and then, I'm sorry, Della, go ahead. You can take the screen down. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lowing.
Yes, thank you. I was going to reference that slide, but we've all seen it. So, generally this early in the process, I wouldn't be concerned about this schedule being chipped in stone. But there is actually already concern on the part of the housing working group from our first meeting that the end of it is quite compressed, looking at the end going back, because if there are any glitches, it doesn't give you guys time to kind of turn it back to PTC. So I think as this thing evolves, that should get a hard look. And then going to the front end of the schedule, it seems like it'd be better to kind of ramp this up a little bit more quickly. I mean, for example, we don't have another meeting until June now, and the first one was just orientation, and we're supposed to have documentation to PTC in July. So I would just urge staff who heard this from the working group to take a look at maybe ramping it up a little bit more quickly, and going with more than a single meeting if the data is there to analyze. So just some concern that, we want to have some fudge factors built in here so that council's not racing in November of 22.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Commissioner Lowing. And we can talk a little bit more and share more of our schedule with the, at the meeting. We really did put a lot of attention into our touch points with the Planning Commission, Planning Transportation Commission, and the City Council. And even though you've got these milestones that are shown on the schedule between, site selection and then final adoption, there are these check-ins that we're doing along the way. And it is our intent to bring the working group, the council ad hoc, the PTC, and the City Council all together in this sort of progression toward a final plan. But your comments are understood, and we received some comments again from another working group member that was also transmitted to the council. Is it's a little unforgiving just in terms of when we have to be done, but we welcome any other additional feedback to help us find some areas where we can make sure that we're not finding ourselves pinched between making some policy decisions and a time constraint.
Commissioner Olczyk.
Hi, good evening. I have a quick comment on the timeline. I think one key takeaway from the materials presented is that the preparation of this upcoming housing element is going to be far more complex and involved than in prior years. And I think utilizing a working group with diverse membership will significantly improve the community acceptance of the final draft. But with the number of new legal requirements and the magnitude of the RENA allocation, I would encourage the leadership to consider having our planning professionals begin the process by taking a few months to first develop an outline, a first draft of the housing element prior to involving the volunteer residents who make up the working group. I think that would help the working group focus their time and effort. There's some challenges that have 100 possible solutions. I don't think this is that kind of solution. I think this kind of challenge. There are a limited number of routes that I think will get us the state certification. And we've got a good group of planners and land use attorneys at 250 Hamilton that I think we should probably look to do some of the heavy lifting. And I say this because I want to avoid a situation akin to the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, where the working group developed multiple recommendations that the staff of our planning department ultimately deemed sort of untenable. And I want to avoid that this go around, and make this efficient and timely.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I was saying council members can have comments and questions on process as well as commissioners. Yeah, Commissioner Heckman.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. It's great to be here on the same Zoom with all of you. It's the first time in my year and a half on the PTC that this has happened, and I'm looking forward to the time in the maybe not too distant future where we can all be in the same room for a meeting like this. I do want to thank staff for the staff report and Rincon, your consultant, who, as it appears, was hired less than a month ago, did some fast work to put together this presentation, and I thought it was very good. And I think we're going to need that speed to continue throughout this process. And I also appreciate the comments that we got from the members of the general public. So I think the feedback that the staff and council are looking for from the PTC tonight are, as the mayor said, more on process and organization. We'll leave the substance for later, and that makes good sense to me. I like the organization as outlined in the staff report with the division of labor and sequencing with the working group, the ad hoc committee, the PTC, and the council. It makes a lot of sense. And the schedule makes sense, although I think I share Commissioner Lowing's concern that if we can get moving faster, maybe we should. I did have one scheduling comment to make, and that is regarding the environmental review for this project. It wasn't on that last slide, but it's referenced in the staff report. So from the staff report, I gathered that we have an EIR from 2017 on the comp plan. And I don't know because I haven't read it, but I suspect that comp plan EIR involved the then current RENA numbers of about 2,000 units. So this new housing element is going to need to analyze the new RENA numbers, which are currently set at 6,000. And it's not clear to me if those can change, but if they can change, they're not going to change appreciably anywhere near 2,000. So the concern I have is that, and I think it's indicated in the staff report, we can't start the environmental review until after the site selection, which occurs under the schedule in March of 2022. And then we have to finish the environmental review immediately prior to the council adoption of the housing element, which is scheduled for November. So that gives us from March to November. And staff is currently anticipating what's called a supplemental EIR. And I think that under CEQA, there's enough time to do that in that time frame from March to November of next year. My concern is that a supplemental EIR is used for what CEQA calls minor additions and changes. And if our housing element is changing from looking at folding in 2,000 units to 6,000, maybe that's a minor change or addition, but maybe it's not. And if it's not, now we're looking at what's called a subsequent EIR, and that has it's a more intensive document and a longer time frame. And so I would just suggest, I'm sure staff has given that some consideration before they put together the staff report, but I encourage them to look at that again and see if some adjustment to the schedule might be necessary to make sure we can get done in time to meet that January 23rd deadline. So those are my comments tonight. Thank you again for having us here.
Thank you. Does Stephanie have any comments on the EIR process?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair Heckman. We're happy to take a look at that again. I don't think the delta between is as great as you're noting, because in the comp plan, we did study a housing increase of about, I think it was on the upper end of about 4,500 units. So that gets us a little closer to our RENA numbers if it holds at 6,000. But your comments are noted, and we'll certainly circle back. Rincon would also be doing the environmental analysis as well, so we can make sure that we don't run into an issue there with the supplemental. Thank you.
So I don't see a lot of hands, so I'm going to go to the city clerk to see if we got a voting update.
Mayor Du Bois, we will need a third round for the Utility Art Commission. But for Public Art Commission, we have Councilmember Cormack, Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka voting for Ben Miyagi. We have Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Philseth, and Councilmember Koo voting for Clea Mugler. So Ben Miyagi with 4 votes is appointed to the second position on the Public Art Commission. For the Utilities Advisory Commission, we have Councilmember Tanaka voting for Carol Guthrie. We have Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Philseth, and Councilmember Koo voting for Don Jackson. We have Councilmember Cormack, Vice Mayor Burt, and Councilmember Stone voting for Phil Metz. So none of the people got a 4 votes or more. So we will send out another link to you for another vote on the Utility Advisory Commission.
Okay, thank you. So if council members will look for that email. Yes, Councilmember Cormack.
Assuming, I just want to be sure the PTC members are done, but
well, we can intersperse too.
Okay,
That's fine.
Great. So from a process standpoint, I really just have 2 questions. And the first is, will the working group be trained like our boards and commissions have been, or have they already been trained? I just mentioned it because, for example, tonight we had a few people speak as members of the public, and I believe they're actually members of the working group. And perhaps they didn't know, but going forward in the future, I think they should probably identify themselves.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Councilmember Cormack. We did have a training on last week, as Tim noted, Brown Act, and I think we also gave a pamphlet guide to do some follow-up work. But we can certainly, and I think we may have talked about when communicating with the press or individuals to represent, as themselves and not as speaking on behalf of the working group. But we can certainly underscore that if we hadn't previously communicated that. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. And then my second question has to do with the ad hoc. I don't quite understand how the ad hoc is going to work with the working group. Will that be done at the working group's regular public meetings, or is the working group appointing leadership who will meet separately with the ad hoc? How is that envisioned to happen?
Great. Let me ask Tim to respond to that.
Sure, be happy to respond, Councilmember Cormack. What will happen is the ad hoc subcommittee will be reviewing the working group product. Since the ad hoc is set to meet every 2 months, they will be reviewing 2 months of working group work product, which staff will present to the ad hoc committee. We did elect 2 co-chairs at the previous working group meeting, but they can certainly sit in on the ad hoc meetings, but it will just be staff presenting information / results of what the working group has done over the past 2 months.
Okay, so let me just test my understanding, Mr. Wong. When the ad hoc has input, they will provide it to staff and staff will provide it to the working group at the next meeting. So that'll be done in public.
That is correct.
Okay.
Any input direction, yes, would be reported back to the working group.
Great. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions I had on process.
Commissioner Templeton or Rupavar, do you guys have any questions, comments? All right, I'll jump in with a few. Oh, I'll say thank you, Commissioner Chang.
So I don't have very many process questions, but some of the process kind of overlaps into some of the content. And so I noticed that the content needs to address constraints. And so because this RENA is so much higher than the past one, and because in the past we've had such a difficult time building affordable housing, I just hope that the housing element group maybe allots, well, it sounds like they have so much work to do this time compared to the past, but I hope that a significant amount of time is allotted to talking about the constraints and thinking creatively about how our housing element might include some thoughts about how we get more funding for the affordable housing, because seeing how NVCAP went, that was a big part of the difficulty towards the end, kind of as Commissioner Alchek had referred to, that some of these plans weren't feasible because of ultimately the financing component of it. And I think that we've seen this over and over again with past housing elements, and the hurdle becomes even higher this time. So it's kind of not quite it's a process / content comment. And so that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Commissioner Templeton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been a great presentation, and I appreciate the chance to hear it together with council. I'm wondering, maybe you can clarify if there's any regulation that, for example, all of the new housing couldn't go into one neighborhood, for example. Is it required as part of this process to distribute it throughout Palo Alto, or is it really up to the working group?
So yeah, I believe it is a requirement to distribute it, but I don't want to let my, I want to act on just my recollection. So Della or Brenna, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can jump in. Sure. One of the things HCD really is looking for is to make sure that housing is spread out across the community, that the various income groups are, or income levels for housing are not situated in one particular area, you know, kind of as you alluded to. So it's not, there is a bill that provides details on the requirements for the housing element. The exact number is going to escape me, but I can guarantee you that that is one thing that they are looking for, especially with this cycle with the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements. They want to make sure really that housing, those barriers to housing are taken down as much as possible, and that the housing across the community is equitable to all. So a piece of that is really spreading it across the community. So you don't end up with things like food deserts and, you know, inequitable access to resources. So that is definitely one thing that they are checking this time around.
Thank you so much, Ms. Weatherby. Can you further clarify what that means? Does that mean by neighborhood, by zip code, by proximity to the highway, or is it really abstract at this point?
In terms of what they're looking for?
What means an equitable distribution? Does it mean that there's some affordable housing in every like Palo Alto neighborhood or every zip code, or do we know what it means?
There's a lot of things that play into that, really, about how a city is developed as of right now, and where those suitable sites are located. The city has to demonstrate that there are sites available, but that they're also suitable, so that there are utilities in place, there's access to transportation available. And so it just depends. There's no set rules. It's really just they don't want to see housing by income level concentrated in one general area. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. They don't check by zip code or by census tract, but they look at the city as a whole to really try and make sure that things are spread out across the city.
And I might just add to that, Commissioner Templeton, that we're gonna respond to the technical requirement as set forth in state law, but there's a policy conversation that would play out also, not only at the working group, but also before the commission and the city council as well. So even if we answered the technical aspect of it, we still may need to make modifications in order to get to our local policy along the lines of where I think you're going, to make sure that it's distributed equitably in our version that also complies with state law.
That makes total sense. Yeah, that was definitely a big piece of feedback that we heard loud and clear from the North Ventura project was, why is it all here? And in that particular case, because that's the area we were studying, but I think now that we're looking at the whole city, we need to make an effort to be as fair as possible about that. The other question, again, I know we're all referring to North Ventura, and I hope it's not too repetitive, but it was very recent, and we spent a lot of time on it at the commission, and of course the working group did as well. So we hit a lot of roadblocks in the discussion with the NVCAP, and just, I guess maybe this is along the lines of what Commissioner Alchak asked, but have we learned from that process how to keep better track on time here? Because I know our timeline for that was far beyond what we expected at the beginning.
Yes, thank you. NVCAP has come up frequently in our conversations as learning opportunities for how we can do things differently or better. And I really want to credit Rachel Tanner for her work, and I think turning around some of that conversation. So Rachel's been a part, she's here tonight, and she's been a part of this schedule and this process as well. And so, yes, is the short answer. We're looking for where we succeeded more recently on that to avoid, doing a similar situation or finding ourselves in a similar situation, including, the idea of the and the way that we're engaging the working group too, so that we're at the beginning in a much more collaborative environment, really get to the issues that we need to address.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's my questions for now.
Yeah, Commissioner Rupavar.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here as part of this joint session with you. I had a question with respect to the interplay between the potential RENA appeal and the timeline for our housing element, and specifically if we do move forward, if City Council does move forward with any potential RENA appeal, how does that interplay or interact with the timeline that you've set forth for that housing element? And then secondarily, there was a mention of a grace period. How does that interplay with it? I'd like to better understand that. And thirdly, specifically with respect to the RENA appeal, is that the City of Palo Alto's appeal to ABAG or commentary to ABAG, which ABAG thereafter turns around and appeals to HCD? How does that work? Because I think, doesn't ABAG represent all the Bay Area cities? If you could just kind of explain a bit more those three elements. Thank you.
Sure. Let me take a first cut at that. And I think actually Mr. Wong may have some more updated information regarding the appeal process, which of course is a discussion that we will have on May 18th at an agendized meeting. So I'd like to, if we're going to, I'd rather wade into the details at that meeting. But the short answer to your question is, from a staff and consultant perspective, we're going to proceed with the draft numbers that we have as our RENA target. And whether the city council decides to pursue an appeal or not, the results of that won't be known for some time. And we're just going to go with the number that is known to us right now and plan accordingly. Tim, did you want to offer any other perspective?
And just to chime in, just a quick response to the appeal on ABAG. The appeals will go to ABAG and they will have the final say. They will not turn around to HCD for additional review. It stops with ABAG. Yeah.
I'll jump in with a few questions and comments. Question for Rincon. What other cities are you representing this cycle?
We're right now working with a number of cities, mainly throughout the SCAG region and San Diego County. We've just wrapped up with the city of Carlsbad, and we're working with the city of Vista and San Diego right now to wrap up. And I'm not going to be able to give you a full list. Likely there's about 26 jurisdictions throughout the state of California that we're working with currently. In the SCAG region in particular, we're working with West Hollywood, the city of Banning, the city of Corona, the city of Burbank, and then moving up, we're working with the city of Port Hueneme. And those are just a handful to name a few. City of Monterey Park is another one that we actually, they're working a little bit late on theirs, but we just kicked that off. So that's just a handful right now. But there are
These cities maybe similar to Palo Alto and land costs and other characteristics.
Yeah, so I think probably the city of Carlsbad would be a really good example. And they went about their process similarly. They had a working group that we facilitated with them that was made up of community members and commissioners, planning commissioners, mobility and traffic commissioners that were located throughout, that live in the city, that are also residents. And they're probably the most similar, I would say, in terms of demographics to the city of Palo Alto as well. And they just submitted their housing element to HCD for certification approximately 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
It sounded like in the staff report, we're breaking this into stages, and I was curious if staff could comment, Tim or Jonathan. How do you envision us choosing sites prior to a policy change discussion if you're not really sure what council's going to support?
Yeah, so maybe I'll take a first cut, and then Tim, from your experience, I think there is a certain element of chicken and the egg, right? Trying to figure out which the policies are to support, the sites. But we do need to start, we do, as you may recall from the last time we went through this, we need to identify specific parcels as a part of that analysis. And so I think we've, through the working group and through the ad hoc and some of our initial conversations with the Planning and Transportation Commission, and guidance that we get from the council throughout this process, what we'll do is we'll take a first cut at trying to find those sites that meet the objectives, but then we could also tweak and modify them as our policies begin to take shape. So I don't know that, site as Chair Heckman had noted, because the site selection is so environmental analysis, it really is a predecessor event that we need to tackle. Even if we don't have it 100% dialed in from the outset, we need to look aggressively at that. Tim, I'm sure you could say that more eloquently than I did.
Thanks, John. Also, as part of it, meeting consistently with the ad hoc committee and checking in with the PTC, and also having Commissioner Lowing on the working group. Also, this constant communication will hopefully help refine some of these sites, or if there's any policy discussions that may change things in the future, we will adjust for that. But to start the process, to make the initial site selections, like John said, we're just going to kind of forge ahead based on direction from the ad hoc and PTC.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree with some of the comments about, concerns about compression of the schedule kind of towards the end, and in trying to increase maybe the number of check-ins with council. It sounds like the working group will meet about a dozen times, maybe a little bit more. But again, I also think Commissioner Alchek had a good point about if you guys need a little bit to get some work done initially, but then, I just don't want to see it all kind of come in at the end and we're kind of stuck. I know the Cities Association has suggested that there may be a process for cities to exchange allocations, but do you expect anything on that front within Santa Clara County?
I haven't heard any recent dialogue about that. I know we were having conversations with some jurisdictions, but it didn't seem like that was a path that was looking too optimistic at the moment.
I mean, is there a process for it? Do we need, or we can just do it if somebody's willing?
So I don't believe that there was a formal process. I think in the past we appealed our RENA and then negotiated through the appeal process for those numbers. And actually, Tim, we did ask ABAG staff if there would be that opportunity, and I don't recall that there would be this time. Do you have information on that?
Yeah, that is correct. Previously, we had exchanged some units in the current cycle with the county, but it's my understanding as part of some of these legal changes that that is no longer a viable option.
And I'm reminded that you may recall that there was an attempt to form a subregion.
Right.
And that subregion would have enabled that opportunity for us to exchange. But that subregion was not formed. And so that process does not exist to us.
Yeah. Well, I do think we should continue like on multiple paths if there is an opportunity. I think if I understood the report, you have to show demonstrated potential for development. So I guess the way I read that will likely drive the distribution of the sites in the city. That I don't see us setting those inside of neighborhoods, as those aren't necessarily demonstratively potential for redevelopment. Is that right? Like we wouldn't just pick a bunch of single family homes as a site because they haven't demonstrated a potential.
So I think what we've laid out in the staff report is sort of this sort of tiered approach where we want to add what we've issued permits for, and there may be some permits that come online that may qualify for this next RENA cycle, particularly possibly through the PHC process. And then we want to really focus our attention on the that are supported by our existing comprehensive plan, and that would include, our commercial areas, the Stanford Shopping Center. The council's had some conversation about areas, including the research park. And we would really look to those commercial and potentially where appropriate industrial areas, and then our multifamily districts as sort of these, as we look to these sites to see what kind of would be necessary if it's not already in place to support the housing production that we need to achieve. And only at that point, if we're not there, then we would approach the working group and ad hoc committee with a conversation. Intent, and if the council feels differently, that would be good feedback for us to receive.
Okay. I mean, I was looking at our current housing element at the very beginning. there's a pretty succinct, I think, powerful statement that said the city's nearly built out with only 0.5% of the developable land vacant and no opportunities to annex additional areas to accommodate future housing needs. So I think that sums up our challenge very well. I would like to challenge the Planning Commission and council members to think a bit outside the box. I believe we're going to have to be very creative and consider possible expansion of the areas that we would consider for housing. And, you know, I'm not talking about our neighborhoods. I'm talking about, like we've talked about before, the Research Park, the Stanford Mall, but even possible annexation areas outside the city that we haven't traditionally considered. I just think we need to really look hard at every opportunity. Okay, Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the Planning and Transportation Commissioners for being here tonight and engaging in this conversation with us. I don't really have any more questions regarding process. All questions I had have been answered so far, so I'll just kind of second what the mayor, most comments that the mayor talked about, and as well as also adding on to my concerns that Commissioner Lowing and several others have brought up as far as the timeline, and especially given the really dramatic impacts that will be triggered if we cannot meet this this deadline. I think it's really important that we are leaning on the side of being more cautious and creating more meetings to make sure that we're not having all this work pile up at the end and really having to struggle to meet that deadline. This is clearly going to be one of the most critical projects that the city takes on for the next couple of years, and want to make sure we do it right. I appreciate Commissioner Olczyk's comments as well regarding NVCAP, and I think that's a good idea to be trying to learn from our recent practices and where we've struggled and try to improve the process as we move along. So those are my comments as far as process. I compliment staff as far as I think the staff report and your presentation tonight has done a really good job at explaining the process and really shining a light on some of the areas where there was some ambiguity before. So thank you for that.
Sorry, Vice Mayor Burt.
Yeah, thanks. First, I'd like to say that I concur with those who have already spoken that are concerned about maybe the process being too truncated toward the tail end. And first, I think it was one of the consultants referred to eligibility for a grace period. I wondered if we could get any clarification on what constitutes that eligibility.
So I don't know if Brenna has more information than what she provided. I really want to caution us to be thinking about, I mean, let's get the information, let's understand what that grace period is. But as I understand it, it's not for meaningful policy discussion. I mean, I think by the time we get to the deadline, we need to be pretty close to being wrapped up. But Brenna, do you want to, can you offer any more perspective on that?
Yeah, I can just concur with what you mentioned. The grace period is really there for cities that are making meaningful pushes towards getting their housing element completed. So the draft needs to already be in. The HCD needs to have had an opportunity to weigh in. Some good progress needs to have been made for that grace period to come into play. If HCD is not seeing any progress like that, then they will, in most cases, revoke that.
So let me clarify what I was looking for, not to build in the grace period into the process, but instead, as we have our initial HCD review that it commences in June 2022, and then we come back and take whatever feedback they have or concerns they have, and we have a good faith effort to try to figure out a way to address those. We then don't know whether they find our responses acceptable. So then we have one shot at the final submittal, And if they don't accept that, then we have a rejected plan. So that's what I'm trying to get clarification on, is how that would work out.
Great, thank you. And I can add maybe a little more color to that. And that's one of the reasons why we selected Rincon, is because included in their project team is Vanessa Tam. I believe it's Vanessa, and I'm sorry if it's Veronica. I know it's a V. Anyways, she has just a tremendous amount of experience, particularly in Southern California, but working with relationships at HCD. And so the whole, once we get to that draft, it really is a process of frequent conversation to make sure that we're not heading down a path where we're going to find ourselves completely out of step with HCD at the end of this process. And then, of course, our schedule has us connecting monthly with the working group, every other month with the ad hoc group. And so I hear the concern. I feel like our schedule and our project team will make sure that we're not going to be completely surprised at the end, but in fact, we will be hopefully in lockstep with each other as we move towards certification.
Okay.
Tim,
I'm sorry.
Tim, anything else to add to that?
Oh, yeah, Vice Mayor Byrd, just like to add that in our constant discussions with HCD during those conversations, we can also learn what policy parameters that HCD may accept as part of their comments to be able to present to the council to make a more informed decision about future policy decisions.
Okay, thank you. And then another question has to do with the missing middle, and there was a slide talking about AB 725, and the income levels of for that missing middle are one way of approaching that, and it's actually the category that we've had the greatest difficulty achieving housing on for probably 3 decades, because in an extremely high land value market like Palo Alto, we can't rely on the market to provide moderate income housing, of new moderate income housing. What exists is older housing stock that is in those, for those income levels. And so I have been really thinking in terms of that going forward, we have to even think about that category as needing subsidies. Now we have, we have a teacher housing project that's going to be for that income level, and that is subsidized, highly subsidized middle income teacher housing. And I think that that's part of the problem. So the AB 725, as I understand it, talks about moderate density and moderate scale as somehow inherently satisfying that missing middle. Can staff or the consultants clarify that, and whether is that the intent of that law? And either way, even if that law is only prescribing the scale and the density of the housing, I'm interested in any thoughts on how we're going to be able to meet our obligations in that income category.
Well, let me ask Della if she can expand a little bit more on that state law, if she has that handy. And I'll just note, as she's getting that information together, that some of these things we're going to have to figure out as we go through the process, and we may not have an answer for you at the moment, but these will be the things that the working group and the ad hoc helps us sort of navigate to make sure that we're getting the type of housing that we need, not only from the state standpoint in the different income categories, but from a policy standpoint, what do we here also in Palo Alto feel like we need to address as well? Della, do you have any more that you can offer on the state law itself in terms of its requirements?
I think that one I'm going to kick to Brenna or Veronica. That is one that, yeah.
I think
Brenna
we've lost
Veronica.
Veronica.
Okay.
But
I mean, I can chime in a little bit just on the law itself. So based on the intent of the law, housing elements that would be adopted on or after January 1st, 2022, which apply to Palo Alto. Those jurisdictions need to fulfill 25% of their moderate and moderate income RENA allocation with developments of multifamily housing of 4+ units, not on sites that can accommodate 4+ units of single family homes or duplex type homes. So they're really looking for that multifamily development more so than they're looking for like a duplex that's on a smaller lot that can get you to that density of they're looking for those moderate and above moderate income units. I don't know if that's explaining it really well.
We can zone for that and even have that housing built, but it won't be priced for that income level. The market won't price it that way.
Right.
Yeah, and I just wanted to jump in here. Rachel Tanner, Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services. I think, Vice Mayor, you're correct in that the law is regarding the type and the design of housing. Missing middle can refer both to kind of this mid-rise scale, something between a single family home and a high-rise apartment building. So that could be garden apartments, that can be duplexes. So there's both the scale, but also the income group of the missing middle income group. And you're right in the sense that just by having a duplex or a small scale apartment does not necessarily dictate that that will be affordable to those middle income groups. We do plan to look at and continue to explore opportunities such as financing that might be available to fund missing middle housing, which is becoming more of an effort by different policy bodies in the state to think about how to actually finance those types of housing units at an income level that is appropriate for kind of that middle income category.
Okay, great, thanks. And then last question, there was a reference in one of the slides to ADUs. As I think everybody here knows, we were early ahead of the state in pursuing ADU liberalization. We now allow both a senior and a junior ADU on essentially every single family lot, what was formerly single family lots. I mean, they're basically now all lots that allow 3 housing units throughout the city. But how are ADUs going to be treated under this housing element?
Sorry, it's not a Zoom meeting if you can't find your mute button once in the session. I think Brenna could probably take the lead on that. You know, part of the I'll let her speak to sort of the percent or how many of those R1 zone properties would we anticipate having ADUs. I think is part of the question that HCD would look to. Brenna, is that about right?
Yeah, so HCD really right now is looking for trends in ADU development. So for example, for jurisdictions in the Skag and Sandag region, they were looking at number of permits that were approved in 2020. So that's the number that they let you base your next 8-year projection off of. So let's say your jurisdiction approved 20 ADU permits in 2020. Then you would be able to assume 20 ADU units every year within that 8-year planning period.
Okay, so we had a big bump in ADUs when we did our first liberalization, and those were predominantly senior ADUs. And we did a promotion of it and everything. More recently, we added the potential for junior ADUs. We haven't done a similar promotion. We don't have as much history on junior ADUs. I expect that if we go into an initiative to really promote and even further incentivize junior ADUs, we'll have a similar bump on that. But we don't have that trend. So how would that be addressed if we've only recently made new changes and haven't seen the trend yet?
Well, they're still really going to look at trends for the numbers that you count. They really want to see that justification provided to show that it is a realistic trend and it's something that the city can be looking towards in the future. With that said, though, if the city wants to take a stab at saying that they can accommodate a larger number of ADUs, that they foresee those larger number of permits coming in. There are policies and programs that we need to include regarding ADU units. And the program that's included needs to include some real monitoring with timeframes and with objectives and action items that will be taken if those numbers aren't realized after the second year is right now what they're looking. They want cities to take a look every 2 years at the numbers that they're seeing, and then implement those action items if they're not achieving the numbers that they had said they were going to achieve.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just do a time check. We'll go to Councilmember Koo, and then Commissioner Alcheck, I know your hand's been up. I don't really want to do a second round with everyone, but if it's something short, we'll do that, and then we'll probably end the joint session. But Councilmember Koo.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, can we use the law in here, AB 686, along with the Fair Housing Act, to have to prevent property owners for making housing units for low-income residents smaller, poorer quality, and making it non-inclusive? Because right now, whenever they build BMRs, they're proposing a different size for it, different materials. Is there a way to make a policy to say that it has to be comparable to all the other units and also to accommodate families?
Brenna, can you respond to that one?
Yeah, that really is actually going to be a city policy. What HCD is looking for is to make sure that housing is equitable and it's available to all. There isn't much in the way that they're looking for in terms of making sure that it's of the same size and that it is for families. That's really going to be a city policy that would come into play.
I do want to say, Councilmember Koo, that currently the city does require that BMR units that are included in a market rate building are of the same quality. So the developer cannot designate it, here are the units that are the BMR and we're going to build them differently than the rest of the building. That's not currently how our process works. And so there are not different standards for inclusionary units than for market rate units. And they have to be of similar quality. Tim may want to add some to that. But in addition, if is part of the policies and programs, we can also look at things such as bedroom mix of development overall. And then when you change the bedroom mix, so if you require a certain amount of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, then some of those are going to be designated as BMR units because the BMR cannot just be all studios, for example, or all 3 bedrooms. They have to follow the mix of the overall development. So Mr. Wong, did you want to add anything about our current policy on that?
Yeah, and just to clarify a little further, staff does work with the developer to choose the actual units the developer may propose, but depending on what the average square footage of a 2-bedroom is, we will look at comparable units. And just to be hyper detailed, they don't have to provide the same finishes, certainly appliances, those type of things, but they don't have to be high end, but that's the only difference between BMR units and market rate units.
And also staff will work with the developers to make sure that they're dispersed in the complex so they're not bunched up in, okay, very good.
Absolutely.
I see Rachel nodding her head. SB 166, right? It says it's a no net loss, but it is actually about ensuring that if we don't have the enough number of units that we have a surplus, but it doesn't address the affordability factor. For example, some of the older units are not their market rate, but they're not as high as the newer units. So this SB 166 does not address that factor, right? The affordable part of it, that it doesn't, it's not a no net loss for the monthly rent that is at the more affordable price because it's an older property.
Right, I believe that's correct. I believe the state law is looking at a unit for unit replacement, not looking at the income.
Okay.
Correct.
Because a lot of times when they finish building something, it's a lot more higher price. So I don't know how. So it's actually no net loss for units, living units or dwelling units, but not for the tenant themselves, not for the people that are going to be displaced or may be displaced.
That's right. And again, it's for the market rate, a market rate unit, whether it's 20 years old or 60 years old, if that gets replaced, the law would provide that it meets that same number, that there's no net loss of units.
We do have some requirements from a different state law, AB 330, that does require for folks who are living in a building, if it's being redeveloped, that they would have some entitlement to relocation assistance and other programs to help prevent or mitigate the displacement of those tenants. So certainly if an existing housing building is redeveloped, there are some provisions in that state law that could help to mitigate that. And notwithstanding, additional policies could be proposed through the housing element itself to further protect those tenants if a existing housing is redeveloped.
And did you say, Rachel, that it was AB 330 or SB 330?
I believe, and maybe it's SB 330.
SB 330, yes.
Getting my alphabet mixed up. Thank you.
SB 330.
Thank
and
you.
Just to touch upon the no net loss also they want to, the state also wants to guarantee that if we have to plan for 6,086 units, and we say, parcel A, based on our projection, is going to have 30 units on it, but if it develops in at 25, that will threaten our arena because we planned exactly for 6086. So the no net loss will probably require that we provide a small surplus also of units to make sure that we stay above that 6086 threshold.
Right. Thank you. I was kind of hoping that they would address the affordability factor, not so much the unit factor. Can contaminated sites be used in the housing element?
So yeah, we can take a look at that. Brenna, do you have a read on that? I mean, just as a matter of course, redevelopment, we do that today, right? I mean, if there's a site that's located in the plume or one of the plumes, then we can, through mitigation measures, allow for redevelopment. So I don't see why that would be excluded from our site selection. Brenna?
Yeah, I mean, there are some environmental constraints that, you really look to avoid. A contaminated site is one really that you're going to look to avoid. A developer is going to look to avoid, and sometimes because they're expensive to develop because of all of the mitigation that they need to take on. But a lot of that really is going to fall into the CEQA process and the environmental analysis that would take place more so than with the housing element itself.
So the answer is that yes, we can include it in the housing element, the sites.
I think it would depend on the site, really. There's, we do have to discuss environmental constraints and how those play into the site inventory. But we have to go through the CEQA process as well for the housing element, and then the development itself will need to go through the CEQA process when they come in later for their entitlement permits. So it's going to get looked at from that side. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would say that the site cannot be excluded, but that's really going to fall under the environmental constraint and analysis process.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to also ask, with the staff update to the ad hoc, did I hear that right, that the staff would be updating the ad hoc committee on the discussion from the working group? Will the co-chairs be also meeting with the ad hoc committee, or is it just going to be staff? And it will be separate staff meet with council, with the ad hoc staff meet with the planning and transportation, not the co-chairs.
So that's correct. The co-chairs will not be a part. They're not a part of the ad hoc. And so what staff would do is we would interact with the working group. We're we'll be continually engaging with the co-chairs, but the co-chairs themselves don't, they're not speaking on behalf of the working group either. That's a more about meeting management. What are we going? How are we going to move the project forward? And then the ad hoc meeting will be staff and the ad hoc, but all these meetings are going to be, even though it's an ad hoc, it's going to be open to the public, and everybody will have a chance to hear the dialogue taking place. And then we would also share with the working group conversation that we got from the ad hoc, and making that as transparent as we can through the process.
Thank you. Last question. The city associations, they had mentioned the planning collaborative because the subregion didn't work out, right? So they talked about a planning collaborative, but I didn't hear it. Do you guys have any idea what the planning cooperative is?
Yeah,
collaborative.
Yeah, the planning collaborative. We're a part of that. We've offered some funds to be a part of that program. We participated in meetings, and at this point, it's a lot of information sharing and talking about resources available to help cities with or jurisdictions with housing element updates. So so we're doing that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Olczyk.
Yeah, really quickly. I have one more quick suggestion for this group. I hate reinventing the wheel, and when Rincon Consulting said this earlier, that the Carlsbad housing element had just been submitted under the new rules, I think it would be incredibly valuable to have staff in coordination with our consultant provide the PTC and council, updates on how a city, like you suggested, Carlsbad was similar to us, on how a city navigated the process of making the case that a previously identified parcel is now likely to be redeveloped. What changes to zoning and what other tools were used to bolster the case that this given previously developed parcel was going to work, and then with respect to state review in that process for Carlsbad or other cities you've worked with, what if any sites were rejected or the logic rejected, and why? The point I'm trying to make is we should learn from the experience of similar cities, and I'll tell you, even for experienced land use attorneys, this is totally new territory. So to the extent that our consultant has experience in that, back and forth with the state, I think it would be invaluable for the council members and PTC members to better understand what worked and what didn't.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks again to our Planning Commission for being here tonight. I think we're going to close this joint session and move to the council action item. So thank you very much. So, all right, I think we're left with council members and staff. So,
I
yes.
do have the results of the final voting.
Okay. Go ahead.
For the Utilities Advisory Commission, we have Mayor Du Bois, Councilmember Filseth, and Councilmember Koo voting for Don Jackson. We have Vice Mayor Burt, Councilmember Cormack, Councilmember Stone, and Councilmember Tanaka voting for Phil Metz. So Phil Metz with 4 votes is appointed to the Utility Advisory Commission.
Great.
And we are done with all the voting.
All right. Well, thank you to all the applicants and congrats to the newly elected commissioners and board members. Okay, so we'll come back to council. And again, as elected representatives, if we have additional comments we want to make to staff, we can also, I think we need to approve the work plan and the proposed schedule. And we have about 45 minutes or so if we stick on our schedule. So, Vice Mayor Burt.
Yeah, so a couple follow-up questions and comments really on more on the prospective outcomes. One of the things I've been concerned about is that the way the process appears to have been established through the legislature and the HCD mandates, where all the cities are mandated to provide housing units, and a micro unit for a single person counts the same as a townhome for a family of four. So have we got a system that's built in that cities in their are incentivized and almost directed to provide overwhelmingly small units and not have a demographic balance on the new units that are built, that a mixture of families and couples and singles? Is that the way the system seems to now be set up by the state?
So I guess I'll take a first cut at that and welcome anybody else to weigh in. I don't think that's the stated intent of the state. I think that there's a number of policy objectives that the state is trying to advance. I hear what you're saying, that one way to achieve, if everything is so focused in on the numbers, how do you get to those numbers? And one efficient way of doing that is you're probably looking at a number of smaller units or studios and things along those lines. But I think that's where we also need to think about our own, demographics and our own policy interests. And I think to some degree the state would require this, is to make sure that we have some balance, and I don't know what that is, of a mix of housing types and opportunities for more than just studios. So I hear what you're saying, but
I agree that that's what we should be doing, and that's what we want to do. But what I'm seeing is that the state mandates are pushing us and other cities to do other than that. That's the point I'm making. And whether that's their stated intention or not, that's the way the mandates are structured, and I don't even think we can call them incentives. I think it's really driving cities to do that, which is not what we want as a city, and I wouldn't think it's what the state wants. But that seems to be the way the laws are set up.
So I hear you. I don't. Tim, did you say you wanted to offer something? I don't know that to offer.
I think to meet the strict letter of the law, to meet the 6,086, that could be an option, but I could not imagine going through HCD and their initial review, once they review the city's policies and programs to try to encourage that type of housing, would meet with great or be approved by HCD. So,
well, we're going to have such difficulty meeting 6,000 housing units, achieving both our city's objectives of a balance in demographics and meeting the numerical demand are conflicting objectives, is what I am trying to get at.
So again, I think we hear you, Vice Mayor, and I think to some degree that's yet to be seen, right? We haven't put together our policy structure yet. I understand the concern, and we're going to be, what we're left with when we go through this process. I don't think the council's asking us to just look at studios, and I don't infer that from your statements. But what I think you're doing is highlighting this conflict between state law and local jurisdiction needs to produce these housing numbers, which are extraordinarily high for Palo Alto, and certainly a lot more than what we've had in the past and anticipated, or not anticipated, but what we've had in the past. What other jurisdictions in the Bay Area have received also higher numbers?
Yeah, no, just to be clear, what I want to see is that balanced demographic, both of types of families, income levels, all those different balances. And I'm just concerned that state law, kind of in a top-down mandate, is not supporting that they're creating a set of mandates and incentives that move us in the opposite direction, not just us, but cities in general. And I don't think it's well thought through. Let me just wrap up on that note for right now.
Councilmember Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll kind of continue on the Vice Mayor's talking points there on these unfunded mandates. And I have a kind of a question for staff on that. Has there been no legislation passed or introduced? I mean, we went over really a long list of legislation targeting housing mandates, but has no legislation passed that will help fund the production of low-income housing? Because really based on the legislation that was briefed tonight as well in the report, it all seems to be really a series of unfunded mandates left to struggling cities in an economic crisis to fund on our own. So is there something that I'm missing there, or is that just kind of the reality of what's coming out of Sacramento lately?
Well, I think a lot of the individual bills that have come forward have noted that there's no funding necessarily associated with them, or no need to reimburse the local jurisdiction or provide that funding. But Rachel, let me ask you to weigh in here, and I know you may have some additional information regarding the topic.
Certainly. I have some, and not tracking the budget as closely or the state bills as closely as our lobbyists, but certainly the state does have a housing bond, which I believe we passed a couple of years ago in the state, that provides funding for housing, as well as proposed funding in the governor's budget. Some of that's directed towards housing that would help persons who are exiting homelessness, but certainly depending on the type of units that are created, those could count towards RHNA. And there are other state funding mechanisms. Some of them would require of course, the application and process by which a specific project would access those funds. And then we have local money in the county through different county measures that have passed to provide funding for housing projects that are proposed. So those are some of the items, but certainly one of the biggest challenges for building affordable housing is, of course, the funding to make it happen. So certainly not enough funding for the number of housing units that we need to be affordable.
And how high really on kind of on staff's priority list has it been trying to seek out those funding opportunities and those government grants to be able to create that housing? Is that something that we're constantly working on, or is that something that requires some more council direction on?
So most funding that's available is project specific. And so it isn't that the city would apply just to say, hey, we'd like to build some affordable housing. You should, give us some money. It's a specific project that an affordable housing developer would be building, and then they would access or, attempt to access those funds. Sometimes they may need support from a local jurisdiction to say, yes, we as a city are supporting this application, or we've entitled the project, or, we're working to permit the development. But it really is a project by project application process.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I was glad to see inclusion of more social justice kind of lenses within the housing laws that have been proposed or have come out lately, such as I think the addition of the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements in the housing elements that's being required. I believe it's AB 686. I think that's a great. I think we're moving in the right direction, at least there. But my continuing frustration with these housing mandates coming out of Sacramento have just been the disproportionate focus on stronger housing mandates for market rate housing rather than low income housing. And this is despite continued evidence that the state overall, including Palo Alto, frequently meets our market rate housing goals. But we all fail miserably when it comes to the production of truly affordable housing units. And I think we all need to be really honest when we're talking about what is the housing crisis in California. It's not a market rate housing crisis, it's an affordability crisis. But Sacramento continues to roll out new legislation that mandates the construction of market rate housing units and penalizes communities for not doing so. But when it comes to legislation targeting fair housing or preventing displacement or promoting the construction of new affordable housing, those legislations lack teeth, and they neither provide the sticks nor the carrots that we see for the market rate housing mandates. So I think we're going to continue to see unfunded housing mandates that force greater production of market rate housing to the detriment of affordable housing. And this growing divide that we've seen in this state for the last several decades of the haves and the have-nots are just going to continue to get worse. And I think this only continues to emphasize really the need for council to take action, not only advocating our state elected officials to properly fund affordable housing, but to also pass city policies that can really help target the construction of truly affordable units, and and to really look into how can we leverage some of that state funding and more private partnerships as well to be able to truly make some meaningful changes there. So I think I'm out of time, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Philseth.
Yeah, pick up on that just briefly in a second here. But I think that, as we go through this process, and you sort of saw the spider web of state bills, helping us figure out how to do this. I hope that working group can figure them all out, because it looks like a blizzard to me. And I think we need to also be a little cognizant that there may be more bills in the future that help the problem even more. And so I think we need to worry about that a little bit. But I think there are two challenges that we're going to have that I think are going to complicate the ability of us to do this. That we're going to have to figure out how to solve it as we go through this process, because we're going to have to come up with a housing element that's compliant with state law. And the first one, like you said, is the affordable housing issue, right? Which is, so our target is 3,500 units of affordable housing. And there are two ways to do that. One is by BMR inclusion rates, and the other is by direct subsidies. And so if you tried it with BMR inclusion rates, at a 15% inclusion rate, we would have to build by 2030 something like 20,000 market rate housing units. Okay, so that's a stretch even for the most enthusiastic folks. So if you subsidize it, the city subsidized Wilton Court about $370,000 for each low-income unit. So if you spool that out by 3,500, you're looking at several $100 million in subsidies needed to meet the target. So I think that's going to be a real challenge that the working group's going to have to navigate through. The other significant challenge that we're going to have, and this is in some ways a mixed bag for Palo Alto, is that the vice mayor's talked about sort of perverse incentives and so forth. And I think one of the real main ones that we're seeing here is that cities are incentivized by the way this works to boost their housing numbers by approving these very large mixed-use projects that provide significant housing, but provide supply, but even more housing demand. Okay. And so actually there's a very good article over the weekend in the Chronicle, and I think everybody ought to go take a look at it, that looks at Redwood City doing that. So Redwood City's 2030 target is 4,588 units. And the article talks about two projects that will potentially go towards that. One is Broadway Plaza and the other is 1601 El Camino. And between the two of them, they generate a little over 1,000 housing units, which sounds pretty good. It's a quarter of the way to their goal. But the two projects also produce 950,000 square feet of office space. And if you do the arithmetic and you use the Working Partnerships USA target for jobs per housing unit, then you come up with it produces a demand for actually twice what it supplies. Okay. And so those two projects actually make the problem worse. Now, why is that a challenge for Palo Alto? Well, a cynical view of that would be that kind of project is not actually legal in Palo Alto because it violates our office caps. Okay, so that's a tool that other cities will have that we will not, and we'll have to work around because the office caps can't be repealed. They're it's done by voters. On the other hand, it's not good for the region. I mean, even the most ardent supply sider, okay, understands that if you add supply, but add even more demand, then prices do not go down, okay? And I think that's something that the region is going to have to deal with. And I don't mean to criticize Redwood City. Redwood City is doing essentially what they're told to by the state. And so I think it's an unintended process, but it's a significant challenge for the region. Those two things: one, the affordable housing, and two, the incentives for cities to actually make the housing problem worse as they pursue their RHNA targets.
So okay, Councilmember Cormack, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Du Bois. I'm not sure, perhaps I missed it in the staff report, but are we expecting the housing element working group to address how affordable housing is funded? I've heard some comments about that, but I'm not sure I saw that in the staff report.
No, that's not the charge of the working group, or and not necessarily we have to identify constraints, and certainly funding is going to be a constraint, and we'll have to identify the available sources that Ms. Tanner was speaking to a moment ago, and perhaps some other ones that are come through this process. But really, for the affordable housing component of it, what we're looking at are sites that provide 20 units per acre, I believe, is the threshold. And if it meets that threshold, then we can identify that as a site that is designated as an area for potential affordable housing. And so that's what we would endeavor to do.
Okay, well, I just don't want anyone to be confused about what they're supposed to do or what we're expecting from them. Pretty sure that that's a standing referral to the Finance Committee that we'll be taking up next month when we're done with the budget. Okay, great. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll just make some quick comments. We've talked multiple times about this allocation. That's 3 times our current 2,000 units, 6,000 units. So I remain convinced that we're going to have to pursue multiple paths at the same time. Working on the housing element, as we're talking about tonight, is one of those paths. Working with other cities to advocate for a more balanced approach statewide with an accurate housing needs forecast. I think we should continue to do that. I think we should continue exploring if we can trade some of our allocation. I heard what staff said tonight. Just let's keep our ears open if we see anything opening up on that front. And I do think we need to continue to investigate and preserve any legal protections that we might have as a city. I do want us to consider an anti-displacement ordinance as one of the policies in this element. So I would be very supportive of that. And several council members have talked about some unintended consequences. I'm concerned that the state and the Regional Planning Association mandates are setting up a situation which is going to freeze housing in the short term. I think cities with these steep goals, I think it's only going to be rational. If you have a large project coming, you're going to try to get it into cycle 6. And so I'm just concerned about that. I just think it's going to be an unfortunate byproduct of this process that we're going to start looking at projects and saying, do we do it now or do we try to do it a few months later so that it falls into the next cycle? I do think we need to envision what an entirely new neighborhood in the research park would look like with schools and other services. Because I think that's the kind of thing we're going to really have to consider. I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating this, but we may be forced to evaluate some use of open space. Again, I think these numbers are so high and we are so built out that, we're going to have to look at everything. And then I guess what I'm hearing tonight too, is that when projects come to us, we're going to have to be really strict about the number of units in those projects, because if we have something in our element for a higher number of units, we're going to have to make it up. I mean, we've done that in the current element as well, but at this kind of level, it's going to get harder and harder to do. I do have one last question. How would HCD look at a new Airbnb ordinance that could potentially convert short-term rentals into longer-term housing stock? Will we get any credit for that, or is that not something that they would, value?
Thanks, Mayor. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you on that, but let me look to our consultants who I think are still here. Brenna, is that something that you're familiar with?
I'm not sure if Brenna is still with us, but I think just to address that, we'll look into it, but I'm not sure how tenure plays into RENA credit versus production, if you will. So as long as they have a kitchen, we could count it. But yeah, short-term versus long-term rentals is another issue that we can look into.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's
I'm 100%
existing. You're
certain.
basically saying it's existing housing stock, so it probably wouldn't count if I hear what you're saying. But maybe, yeah, maybe we could look at beach towns or others and see if they've ever like taken that into consideration.
Okay.
But all right, thank you. Those are my comments. Any other council comments? I think staff is also looking for a motion just to approve the work plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're just looking for the council's endorsement that the information that we provided in the staff report in terms of our approach and our schedule is in line with your expectations and just a motion to that effect, roles, and responsibilities with respect to the working group and the ad hoc and so forth.
So moved.
Yeah, I'll make the motion with the caveat of just hearing the comments tonight about concerns about backloading the schedule too much.
Second.
Okay.
So basically, I think it's make the staff motion, Beth, if you want to put it up with with an attempt to spread the workload as evenly as possible over the schedule, I guess.
Yeah, we'll get it up there.
Vice Mayor Burt. Also, I don't really have any comment on the motion. Councilmember Filseth, do you have any comment on your second?
Looks cut and dried, other than, again, we got to take a look at the schedule and make sure we're not asking for major extensions at the end. So we got to track that.
Okay, so the other thing that I just wanted to follow up on is something that Mayor Du Bois brought up earlier, which is if we have zoning changes that are necessary, or any significant zoning changes necessary to create the housing sites, that I think we are going to need another check-in with the council in addition to what's already in the timeline. So I guess I have a question for staff. Is that understood? And in approving the motion as written, that doesn't, are you still recognizing and essentially incorporating that potential need?
Yes, if again, so with the ad hoc, we would, which I believe consists of the mayor, Councilmember Filseth, and Councilmember Greer Stone, I believe. Okay, Tim's shaking his head. Yes. So we'll be checking in with the three of them, not with the intent for policy direction that the council has not weighed in on, but with the goal to ensure that the path that we are moving forward is consistent with what the council's articulated, and also to advise us of check-ins or, hey, we should go take this back to the city council. And certainly, it is our intent to throughout this process. And so when we feel like there is a potentially a major policy shift or adjustment or something new, we will come back and make sure that we're checking in with the council before we go too far afield. The schedule doesn't allow us to get caught off guard. So we will be doing everything we can to make sure that you're along with this journey with us so that we can course correct as needed.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we just go ahead and vote on the motion. Not seeing any other hands. Okay, so I think we're starting with me. I will vote yes. Councilmember Filseth?
Yes.
Councilmember Koo?
Yes.
Councilmember Stone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Burt?
Yes.
And Councilmember Cormack?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so that includes our action item. I think we go to council member questions, comments, announcements before we go into closed session? Does anybody have any announcements? Councilmember Cook.
I have a question actually to the city manager. There was a oral communications about an incident with a lady in Ventura neighborhood on Kurtner. Can you find out more about that for us, please?
I will consult with the department and confirm what information could be provided while respecting privacy of the individuals involved.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a concerning incident, but I'd like to find out what transpired first. Thank you.
So I would like to mention that I was planning to adjourn the meeting tonight for the Peace Officers Memorial Day, which is really in honor of police officers who've lost their lives or become disabled during their duty. And that's this Saturday, coming Saturday, May 15th. We will adjourn the meeting after the closed session. So I just wanted to mention it now since I expect nobody will be here. Okay, so I was not seeing any other questions or comments. We have a closed session on cybersecurity. Do we want to see if there are any comments from members of the public on the closed session?
Any member of the public wishing to speak regarding the closed session on cybersecurity, please raise your hand at this time. At this time, we have one speaker, Rebecca Eisenberg. Rebecca, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. I saw that this session is about cybersecurity, and I'm very concerned because I was looking at the Palo Alto City page about security risks, and cybersecurity, of course, is listed as one of them, but so is pandemic, and so is toxic waste spill. So it's funny that, and somewhat ironic that you're going to talk about cybersecurity, because an overabundance of security is what actually worsened the environmental damage that caused by this toxic waste incident that I wish you all would have addressed during this meeting. Winter Delabach actually spoke very articulately and convincingly, and I hope that you heard her and took into account what she said. She talked about how the damage to the environment was worsened due to the encrypted police radio transmissions. And I am urging you not to use a dime of this money to further encryption of police radio transmissions. News sources, community members, children, pet owners all look to this resource. Right now, as Ms. Delabach mentioned, she didn't see any evidence or warning signs, and that children and pets could still be playing in this contaminated water. And you might be aware of the fact that children and pets can be killed by contaminated water. Truly, a toxic waste incident or a spill incident like what just happened is worthy of emergency notice. Lives are on the stake. I get that you have a closed session about encryption, but it's encryption that has harmed the community and may lead to lost lives. Please think about this when you prioritize how to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Mayor Du Bois, there's no other speakers at this time.
Okay, so could I get a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
I will second. So let's go ahead and vote on that. Councilmember Philseth?
Yes, and Beth, can you send me the link? Thanks.
Councilmember Koo?
Yes.
Councilmember Stone?
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Burt?
Yes.
Councilmember Cormack?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So I'm going to suggest we take another break and that everybody connect by 8:30, and we'll start our closed session. See you guys there.